1986, Hilarious History to Fall Asleep, a narrative of Hubris and Hairspray by Mark Twain. Copyright 2026. James Henderson. Chapter 1. The Traveler Returns. I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It was a grand celestial entrance, the sort of thing a man of my temperament rather appreciates. A flaming signature across the sky, announcing to the world that a creature of significant mischief had arrived. I told everyone who would listen that I expected to go out with it, too. The Almighty has said, no doubt, now here are these two unaccountable frauds. They came in together, they must go out together. And true to the script, when that icy vagabond returned in 1910, I packed my bags, tipped my hat to the Mississippi, and slipped into the great unknown. One might assume that death provides a certain level of privacy, or at the very least, a permanent exemption from the obligations of the calendar. But here it is, 1986, and I find myself once again staring up at the night sky, feeling very much like an uninvited guest at a family reunion where nobody recognizes the face, but everyone is vaguely annoyed by the smell of my cigar. The Comet has returned, you see, but if 1835 was a grand debut and 1910 was a dignified exit, 1986 is something of a botched encore. It is a celestial disappointment of the first water. I have seen more impressive displays of light coming from a damp match in a dark cellar. Yet the people of this decade, a people who, I might add, appear to have been collectively startled by a giant electrified comb, judging by their hairstyles, are behaving as though the heavens have opened to reveal the secrets of the ages. I have been observing this modern world through the lens of a telescope, and more often through the flickering blue glow of the television set, which appears to be the new American hearth. In my day, we sat around a fire and told lies about ghosts and river pirates. Now, the people sit around a plastic box and let the box lie to them about laundry detergent and politicians. It is a more efficient system, I suppose, as it saves the common man the labor of having to invent his own nonsense. The 1986 incarnation of my old friend, the Comet, is playing hard to get. It has chosen to stay on the far side of the sun, lurking in the shadows like a debtor avoiding a sheriff. To see it at all, one must travel to the southern hemisphere or buy an expensive piece of glass tubing that costs more than a decent house in Hannibal used to. And even then, what do you see? A smudge, a fuzzy, grayish hiccup in the velvet of space. The astronomers are calling it a scientific bonanza. They have sent a fleet of mechanical gnats, probes with names like Giotto and Vega, to poke and prod the poor thing. In my time, we were content to let a comet be a portent of doom or a sign of divine favor. We didn't feel the need to fly up to it and take its temperature or photograph its backside. There is a certain indignity in being a trillion-ton rock that has traveled the cold reaches of the universe for 76 years only to be met by a tin can with a camera that wants to know what you're made of. It turns out the comet is mostly dirty ice. This is the great revelation of the 20th century, that the flaming herald of my birth is essentially a cosmic slush fund. I find myself wandering through this year of 1986 with a sense of profound bewilderment. Everything is faster, sleeker, and more convenient, yet everyone seems to be in a state of perpetual agitation. They have invented a microwave oven, which allows a man to ruin a piece of meat in 3 minutes instead of the customary hour. They have computers, which are boxes of sand that have been taught to think, though they mostly seem to think about ways to make office work more complicated. And the fashion. I have always been a man who appreciated a good white suit, but the citizens of 1986 have embraced a color palette that suggests a riot in a crayon factory. They wear neon. They wear shoulder pads that make a bank clerk look like a linebacker for the Green Bay Packers. The women, and a fair number of the men, have hair that is held in place by a chemical resin so potent that I suspect it could be used to waterproof the hull of a steamboat. It is a strange time to be a ghost. I sat in a park recently, spiritually speaking, of course, and watched a young man try to see the comet through a pair of binoculars. He was wearing a shirt with a small alligator on the chest, a piece of branding that I found utterly inexplicable. If I am going to have a reptile on my person, I want it to be a real one, and I want it to be afraid of me. He fumed and cursed, adjusting his focus until finally he shouted, "I see it! I see the smudge!" He was triumphant. He had witnessed the great traveler. He then immediately returned to his Walkman, a device that allows a person to carry a small orchestra in his pocket, provided the orchestra only plays songs that sound like a cat being dragged across a washboard. I looked up at that smudge and felt a pang of sympathy. The comet and I, we are relics. We are artifacts of a slower, more deliberate age. In 1835, the world was a vast, mysterious place, and a comet was a message from the infinite. In 1986, the world is a small, noisy place, and the comet is just another item on the evening news, wedged between a report on new Coke, a beverage that proves man can improve upon perfection and fail miserably, and a commercial for a car that talks back to you. There is a great deal of talk about progress. The humans of this era are very proud of how far they have come. They have conquered the moon, they have split the atom, and they have invented Velcro, which is a form of artificial burr that allows one to fasten one's shoes without the mental strain of tying a knot. But as I watch them hold their breath for a glimpse of a faint light in the sky, I realize that the human heart hasn't changed a lick. They are still looking for a sign. They are still hoping that there is something out there in the dark that knows they exist. They have built these marvelous telescopes and launched these daring probes because they are lonely. They want to know if the universe is as crowded as a New York City sidewalk, or as empty as a politician's promise. As for me, I am content with the smudge. I don't need Giotto to tell me that the comet is made of ice and dust. I know what it is made of. It is made of the same stuff as dreams and memories and the long-lost whistles of the riverboats. It is a clock that ticks once every 3/4 of a century, reminding us that while we may change our hats and our hairstyles, the great comedy keeps on playing to a full house. So, if you are reading this while drifting off to sleep, do not fret if you missed the comet this time around. It will be back in 2061. By then, no doubt, people will be wearing hats made of actual lightning and eating dinner in the form of a single purple pill. But the comet will still be there, a cold, silent traveler passing through the neighborhood, wondering why we've made such a mess of the place. I shall remain here for a while, I think. This 1986 is a loud, garish, and utterly ridiculous year, but it has a certain charm. It is a year of grand ambitions and spectacular blunders which, as any reader of my work knows, is the exact recipe for a good story. I shall watch the Top Gun pilots preen, I shall listen to the Wall Street tickers hum, and I shall wait for the next chapter of this absurd human history to unfold. After all, a man who came in with a comet and went out with a comet has a reputation to uphold. I can't very well leave now just when the jokes are starting to get interesting. The traveler has returned, and though the guest may be uninvited, he has every intention of staying for the punchline. Now, tuck the covers in, turn off that flickering box, and try not to worry about the state of your hair. The stars aren't judging you, they're just waiting for their next cue. Good night, and may your dreams be less blurry than a 20th century comet. Chapter 2. The 7-Minute Silence. I have lived through a great many eras of progress, and if there is one thing I have learned, it is that the human race's favorite pastime is finding new and imaginative ways to blow itself up in the pursuit of a better view. In my day, we did this with steamboats. We would take a perfectly good wooden vessel, cram it full of high-pressure steam and enough vanity to sink a continent, and then race another boat until the boilers decided they'd had enough of being part of the Industrial Revolution and preferred to be part of the atmosphere. A steamboat explosion was a spectacular, if somewhat messy, way to meet one's maker. It was a local affair, a loud bang, a shower of splinters, and a few dozen people suddenly finding themselves in the next county without the benefit of a carriage. But in 1986, I observed that the Americans have scaled up their catastrophes to a degree that would make a Mississippi pilot weep with envy. They don't just blow up on a river anymore. They do it in the heavens, in front of a live television audience with the sort of precision and fanfare usually reserved for a royal wedding. The event was the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger. Now, the shuttle is a curious contraption. It looks like a brick with wings strapped to a massive orange thermos bottle and 2 giant sparklers. The idea is to shoot this brick into the vacuum of space, let it circle the Earth like a confused pigeon, and then glide back down to a desert in California. To the modern mind, this had become routine. That is a dangerous word, routine. It is the word man uses right before the universe decides to remind him that he is essentially a featherless biped living on a spinning rock that doesn't owe him a lick of cooperation. By January of 1986, the American public was bored with space. They had walked on the moon, they had sent tin cans to Mars, and they were beginning to find a whole business about as exciting as watching paint dry on a fence. Though, as I recall, I once managed to make fence painting look like a privilege, a trick the government was now trying to pull with the Teacher in Space program. They chose a woman named Krista McAuliffe. She was a school teacher, a person whose primary professional hazard was usually a stray spitball or a particularly dull geography lesson. The plan was to send her up into the great void so she could teach a lesson to every school child in the nation from the ultimate high school. It was a stroke of marketing genius. It was meant to show that space was for everyone, that it was as safe as a Sunday stroll in the park. I have seen safe bets before. I once invested heavily in a typesetting machine that was safe and guaranteed to revolutionize the world. It succeeded only in revolutionizing the way I filed for bankruptcy. The morning of January 28th was cold. In Florida, which is a state primarily known for sunshine, retirement, and mosquitoes the size of small birds, cold is considered a personal insult. There was ice on the launch pad. Now, a sensible man, seeing icicles hanging from a rocket, might suggest that perhaps we should wait for a thaw, or at least until the sun has had a chance to apologize for the weather. But routine was in the driver's seat. The schedule was tight. The president had a speech to give. The machinery of bureaucracy has no thermostat. It only has a go button. I watched, spiritually, from the comfort of a cloud that didn't require life support, as the engines ignited. For 73 seconds it was the greatest show on earth. The shuttle rose on a pillar of fire, a testament to man's audacity and his refusal to stay where he belongs. And then, in a heartbeat, the routine vanished. There was no bang that I could hear from my vantage point, just a sudden, violent flowering of white smoke. The two solid rocket boosters broke away like a pair of angry white snakes, slithering through the blue sky in opposite directions, while the main body of the craft simply ceased to be a craft. It became a cloud of debris falling toward the Atlantic. For 7 minutes, the nation was silent. It was a silence so heavy you could have weighed it on a produce scale. On the television, the announcers, men who are paid by the word to explain things they don't understand, found themselves utterly bankrupt of speech. They stared at the screen, waiting for a shuttle to emerge from the smoke like a magician's rabbit. But the rabbit was gone, and the hat was on fire. It was later revealed that the culprit was an O-ring, a piece of rubber, a circle of synthetic material no more complicated than the seal on a jar of peaches. It had become brittle in the cold. It had failed to do its one job, which was to stay squishy. Consider the irony. Man builds a machine with millions of parts, powered by liquid hydrogen and oxygen, guided by computers that can calculate the trajectory of a flea across a ballroom, and the whole grand enterprise is undone by a piece of rubber that wouldn't hold its temper in a frost. It is the sort of joke the Creator plays when he thinks we're getting too big for our britches. We build towers of Babel, and he doesn't need to send a lightning bolt. He just sends a small chill and a cheap gasket. The heartbreak was universal. It wasn't just the loss of 7 brave souls. It was the loss of the illusion. We wanted to believe that the frontier had been tamed, that the heavens were just another neighborhood we could commute to. We forgot that the frontier is always a place of toll-takers. Whether it is the Oregon Trail, where the toll is paid in cholera and broken axles, or the Mississippi River, where it is paid in snags and burst boilers, the cost of going faster is written in the blood of those who go first. I saw the children in the classrooms, their faces turned toward the screens, waiting for their teacher to wave from the stars. Instead, they learned the most difficult lesson of all, that the universe is indifferent to our schedules, our sentiments, and our teacher in space programs. It is a vast, cold, and beautiful place that does not care if you are a hero or a school teacher. If you challenge its laws with a brittle O-ring, it will break you without a second thought. The president, a fellow named Ronald Reagan, who, I must say, has a very fine head of hair and a way of speaking that reminds me of a practiced stage actor, eventually found the words. He spoke of slipping the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. It was a lovely sentiment, the kind of thing that looks very well on a monument. But I suspect the Sem souls on board would have preferred to stay within the surly bonds a bit longer, provided those bonds were attached to a functioning parachute. In the aftermath, the nation moped. The space program was grounded. The routine was replaced by investigation, which is a fancy word for finding someone to blame for the fact that we forgot nature is dangerous. I find that we humans have a short memory for tragedy, but a long appetite for hubris. We will mourn the challenger. We will fix the O-rings. We will write poems about the high flight. And then, in a few years, we will find ourselves back at the launch pad, convinced once again that we have the stars in our pocket. It is our most redeeming and most ridiculous quality. We are a race of creatures that can see a fiery death in the sky, and after a brief and respectful silence, start wondering when the next flight departs. We are determined to go where we aren't invited, to stay where we can't breathe, and to look cool while doing it. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, give a small thought to the challenger, not with the heavy, leaden sorrow of the news anchors, but with a bit of the old frontier spirit. Remember that the silence of 1986 wasn't just the silence of a disaster, it was the silence of a nation realizing that the road to the future is paved with more than just good intentions and high-tech gadgets. It is paved with the courage to be wrong, the tragedy of being right too late, and the stubborn, unaccountable habit of trying again. The stars are still there, cold and mocking, and we are still here, down in the mud, looking up and checking our rubber gaskets. It's a comedy, I tell you, a grand, heartbreaking, beautiful comedy, and I wouldn't miss the next act for all the gold in California. Good night, and mind the temperature. It's the little things that'll get you every time. Chapter 3. The Graphics Group Independence. I have always maintained that the only way to keep your health is to eat what you don't want, drink what you don't like, and do what you'd rather not. However, in this peculiar year of 1986, I have discovered a new rule for the digital age. If you wish to maintain your sanity, you must never ask a computer how it spends its free time. It is almost certainly plotting to replace your favorite illustrator with a series of complex math problems. This brings us to a curious transaction that took place in Northern California, a region of the world that seems to produce more visionaries per square mile than the Mississippi produces mosquitoes in July. A gentleman by the name of George Lucas, a fellow who has made a staggering fortune selling plastic laser swords and stories about furry midgets in space, found himself in a bit of a financial pickle. It appears that even in the 20th century, a divorce is a more effective way to redistribute wealth than any socialist uprising could ever hope to be. To keep his cinematic empire afloat, Lucas decided to sell off a small, oddball division of his company known as the Graphics Group. These were a collection of high-minded scientists and artists who were obsessed with the idea of drawing by arithmetic. They weren't interested in ink or charcoal or the honest sweat of a man trying to capture a likeness on canvas. No, they wanted to teach a box of wires and sand, a computer, how to imagine the world. Enter Steve Jobs. Now, Mr. Jobs is a character I find instantly recognizable. He is the quintessential American type, a man with a silver tongue, a temperament like a lightning storm, and a conviction that he is the only person in the room who truly understands the future. He had recently been invited to leave his own company, Apple, by a board of directors who apparently found his vision to be a bit too much like being trapped in a room with a hungry tiger. Looking for his next act, Jobs bought this graphics group for the tidy sum of $5 million, plus another $5 million to keep the lights on. He renamed it Pixar. In my day, if you wanted to see a bouncing ball, you dropped a ball and watched it bounce. If you wanted to draw a bouncing ball, you sat down with a pencil and ruined 40 sheets of paper trying to get the squish right. But the Pixar fellows had a different idea. They believed that if you gave a computer enough equations, physics, light, geometry, and perhaps a dash of pure stubbornness, the machine could calculate the bounce for you. They called this 3D computer graphics. I was skeptical. I have a long and storied history with miraculous inventions. I once poured a king's ransom into a typesetting machine called the Page Compositor. It was a marvel of engineering, a mechanical brain that could do the work of 6 men. The only problem was that it had the temperament of a prima donna and the structural integrity of a house of cards. It eventually went to the scrap heap, taking my fortune with it. So, when I hear about a machine that can think of a picture, I reach instinctively for my wallet to make sure it's still there. But then I saw what these Pixar people were doing. They released a short film in 1986 called Luxo Jr. It stars 2 desk lamps. Not people, not animals, not even a talking frog. Just 2 pieces of office equipment, a big lamp and a small lamp playing with a rubber ball. Now, I have spent many a night riding by the light of a lamp, and I can tell you that a lamp is generally as expressive as a bucket of coal. But through the magic of this cartooning by numbers, these scientists managed to make that little lamp look happy. They made it look sad. When the ball popped, they gave a soul to a piece of furniture. It was a revelation and a deeply unsettling one. If a machine can be taught to understand the subtle dip of a lamp's head to convey disappointment, what hope is there for the rest of us? I began to realize that we are entering an era where the line between what is real and what is rendered is going to get as blurry as a drunkard's vision at 3 in the morning. The Pixar image computer, which was the actual product they were trying to sell at the time, was a colossal failure. It cost more than a fine steamboat and was about as easy to operate as a steam engine in a hurricane. They sold very few of them, mostly to hospitals and the government. It turns out that while the world wasn't quite ready for a $50,000 box that draws pictures, it was very much ready for the stories that box could tell. I find a great deal of humor in the fact that Steve Jobs, a man who prides himself on being a master of the user experience, spent several years funding a company that couldn't sell a single thing to a regular user. He was, in effect, the patron saint of a very expensive hobby. But that is the American way. We spend millions of dollars and years of labor on a folly, only to find out later that the folly is actually the foundation of a multi-billion-dollar industry. There is a lesson here, though I suspect it's one that most people will ignore in their rush to buy the latest gadget. We are becoming obsessed with the pixel. A pixel, as far as I can tell, is a tiny dot of light that, when combined with millions of its brothers, creates an image. In my time, we had the pointillists, painters who made pictures out of dots, but they were doing it to capture the light of the French countryside. These modern folks are doing it to capture the light of nothing. They are creating worlds out of thin air and electricity. I worry about what happens when we stop looking at the world and start looking only at the rendered version of it. Will a child of the future know what a real lamp looks like? Or will they only know the one that bounces on a screen? Will they know the smell of oil and the flicker of a flame? Or will they prefer the sterile perfection of a digital glow? However, as I watch that little lamp hop across the screen, I can't help but be charmed. It is a triumph of human ingenuity, even if it is a bit frightening. We have managed to take the coldest, most logical thing in the world, a computer, and force it to be whimsical. We have taught the machine to play. So, if you find yourself unable to sleep, pondering the fact that your own life feels a bit like it's being lived in low resolution, take comfort in the story of Pixar. It reminds us that even when you've been kicked off the boat, and even when your expensive machines won't sell, and even when your only friends are two desk lamps and a rubber ball, you might still be on the verge of changing the world. Just try not to invest all your money in a typesetting machine along the way. Trust me on that one. The 20th century is a strange place, filled with men who sell dreams and machines that calculate heartbreak. But as long as there's a bit of humor in the code, I suppose I can tolerate the pixels. Now, turn off your own little glowing boxes. Let the mathematics of the day fade away and try to dream in high definition. Good night, and may your O-rings always be pliable and your pixels always be bright. Chapter 4. The Mere Porch. Man is a restless creature. He is never quite satisfied with the dirt he was born on, and he spends a goodly portion of his life trying to get to some other dirt that is further away and twice as expensive to reach. In my younger days, we thought we had reached the pinnacle of human wandering when we could hop a steamboat in St. Louis and wake up in New Orleans without having to fight a single bear along the way. But the humans of 1986 have decided that the entire planet is a bit too cramped for their liking, and they have begun to look for lodging in the one neighborhood that has no air, no gravity, and a distinct lack of decent saloons: the Great Vacuum. In February of this year, while the Americans were still scratching their heads over their burned-out rockets and brittle O-rings, the Soviet Union, a collection of folks who seemed to treat engineering with the same grim determination a schoolboy treats a Sunday sermon, quietly launched a thing called Mir. Now, Mir is a Russian word that means both world and peace. It is a charmingly ambitious name for what is essentially a series of interconnected tin boilers tumbling through the void at 17,000 miles an hour. It is the world's first permanent boarding house in the sky. In my day, a boarding house was a place where you shared a hallway with a retired sea captain and a woman who smelled of cabbage. In 1986, a boarding house is a modular laboratory where you share a pressurized tube with a man named Yuri and a lot of very expensive buttons that you must never, ever press by mistake. I find the Russian approach to the heavens to be deeply instructive. While the Americans want to build a shuttle that looks like a sleek white swan, the Russians build things that look like they were hammered together in a tractor factory by men wearing heavy coats and drinking tea out of glasses. The Mir is not a masterpiece of aesthetic grace. It looks like a mechanical octopus that has had an unfortunate encounter with a scrapyard. But it has one quality that the sleek American birds lacked in early '86. It stays up there. They call it a space station, but I prefer to think of it as the Mir porch. It is a permanent parlor hanging in the vacuum. The Russians have decided that if they cannot beat the Americans to the moon, a race they lost some years back, much to their collective chagrin. They will simply move into the neighborhood and refuse to leave. They are the neighbors who build a porch on the front of their house just so they can sit in their undershirts and watch the rest of the world go by. I have spent some time, purely in the spirit of research, you understand, contemplating what it must be like to live on the mere porch. Imagine, if you will, being a cosmonaut. You are a man of high intelligence and iron nerves. You have been trained to handle the most complex machinery ever devised by the human mind. And yet, for months at a time, your entire world is a space no larger than a medium-sized Pullman car. There is no up, and there is no down. If you drop your spectacles, they don't fall to the floor. They simply drift away like a bored ghost, eventually hiding behind a ventilation duct where you won't find them for 3 weeks. Your dinner comes out of a tube. I have lived in some questionable hotels in my time, and I have eaten meals that I am fairly certain were prepared in a blacksmith's forge. But I have never had to squeeze my borscht out of a container that looked like a tube of toothpaste. It takes the dignity out of a meal when you have to eat it, like you're applying ointment to a rash. But it is the loneliness that interests me most. I once knew a night watchman on a deserted wharf in Cincinnati. He was a man who spent his hours staring at the dark water, listening to the creak of the timbers and the occasional slap of a wave against the pilings. He was surrounded by the city, but he was utterly alone. He told me once that after midnight, the silence begins to have a sound of its own, a sort of low hum that makes a man wonder if he's the last person left on the face of the earth. A cosmonaut on the Mir must feel that 10 times over. He looks out the porthole and sees the earth, a beautiful, glowing marble of blue and white, spinning in the dark. He can see the lights of cities where millions of people are eating supper, arguing about politics, and going to the theater. He can see the very streets where his wife is walking the dog, and yet he is separated from them by 200 miles of nothingness and a few inches of aluminum. He is a night watchman on a wharf that has no shore. Does he get lonely? I reckon he does. He probably gets so lonely that he starts talking to the computers, and the computers, being Russian, probably answer him back with a series of depressing beeps. He must miss the small things: the smell of rain on a dusty road, the sound of a bird that isn't a recording, the simple pleasure of sitting in a chair that doesn't try to float away from the table. On the Mir, you don't sit. You tether. You tie yourself to the furniture like a goat to a post, just so you can stay in one place long enough to write a letter home. There is a grand, quiet heroism in it, and also a profound absurdity. Here we are, a species that still hasn't figured out how to prevent the common cold or keep our neighbors from shooting at one another over a patch of desert, and yet we are bolting together a parlor in the sky. We are determined to plant our flag in the vacuum, even if we have to live in a tin can to do it. The Soviets call it Mir, peace. There is a delicious irony in that, considering that the two great powers of this era are currently engaged in a Cold War that involves enough nuclear weaponry to turn the entire planet into a scorched cinder. We name a space station Peace, while we spend our days building peacekeepers that are actually intercontinental missiles. It's the sort of double talk that would make a riverboat gambler blush. It's like naming a pet shark Fluffy and then acting surprised when it takes a chunk out of your leg. But perhaps mirror is the right name after all. From up there on the porch, you can't see the borders. You can't see the fences or the customs houses or the soldiers standing guard over imaginary lines in the dirt. You just see the world. One big, round, fragile ball that looks like it could use a bit of peace and quiet. I imagine the cosmonauts looking down and feeling a certain pity for us. We are all down here, scurrying about like ants on a disturbed mound, while they are up there, drifting in the eternal silence, watching the sun rise and set 16 times a day. They have reached a perspective that is denied to the rest of us, even if they have to pay for it by living in a place that smells of recycled air and old socks. As I watch the mirror porch tumble across the night sky, a faint spark among the stars, I find myself feeling a strange kinship with those lonely watchmen. We are all of us just travelers on a larger mirror, drifting through a much vaster vacuum. Some of us are in the first-class cabins, and some of us are down in the hold, but we're all on the same boat, and none of us really knows where it's heading. So, as you settle into your bed, which, I might remind you, stays firmly on the floor thanks to the good graces of gravity, be thankful for the weight of your blankets. Be thankful that your dinner doesn't require a squeeze tube, and that if you feel the need for company, you can simply walk out the front door and find a human soul who isn't bolted to a bulkhead. The Russians are on their porch, watching the stars and waiting for the next module to arrive. They are the pioneers of a new kind of solitude, and while I admire their pluck, I think I'll stay down here a while longer. The air is better, the tobacco is easier to light, and the view of the stars is much more impressive when you don't have to worry about them leaking into your living room. Good night, and may your dreams be grounded in the solid earth, far away from the silent spinning parlor of the mirror. Chapter 5. The Brain Fever. I have always been of the opinion that the more I see of men, the more I admire my dog, and the more I see of these modern thinking machines, the more I appreciate a sturdy, reliable rock. In this year of 1986, the human race has achieved something truly remarkable. They have managed to take a box of cold, unfeeling silicon and give it the one thing it didn't need to be truly human, a common cold. They call it a computer virus. It is a magnificent bit of nomenclature. To name a mathematical error after a biological plague suggests that man has finally realized his creations are just as frail, just as prone to fits of sneezing, and just as likely to ruin a perfectly good Sunday afternoon as he is. The first of these digital poxes to strike the IBM PC is a little devil known as brain. Now, in my day, if you said a man had brain fever, it usually meant he'd spent too much time reading poetry or had been kicked in the head by a particularly disgruntled mule. In 1986, brain means your computer has caught a contagion that makes it sluggish, uncooperative, and prone to displaying the names and addresses of two brothers in Pakistan. The Pirates of Lahore. The story of Brain is a comedy of manners that would have made a fine play had I the energy to write it and a cast of actors who understood what a floppy disk was. It was not created by a cabal of dark-hooded villains lurking in a damp basement, plotting the downfall of Western civilization. No, it was created by two brothers, Basit and Amjad Farooq Alvi, who ran a computer shop in Lahore. These lads were fed up with software pirates, men who would take a piece of hard-earned code, copy it onto their own disks, and go about their business without paying a solitary nickel to the creators. It is a sentiment I sympathize with deeply. I have spent a significant portion of my life chasing copyright thieves across 3 continents, only to find that the law is usually more interested in protecting the thief's right to a fair trial than the author's right to his breakfast. The Alvey brothers decided to strike back. They wrote a small piece of protective code and hid it on their disks. If someone dared to copy their work, the brain would activate. It wouldn't destroy the computer. That would be uncivilized. Instead, it would slow down the machine's memory and display a polite message informing the thief that they had been caught, along with the brother's phone number so the offender could call and apologize. It was meant to be a digital beware of dog sign, but as with most things involving man and his machines, the dog got off the leash, jumped the fence, and proceeded to bite everyone in the neighborhood. The great sneezing of the silicon. You see, the brain virus didn't stay in Lahore. It hitched a ride on those thin black squares of plastic called floppy disks. In 1986, a floppy disk is the primary way a computer communicates with its peers. It is the social butterfly of the office. You put it in one machine to save a letter, then you carry it over to another machine to print it out. It is a perfect system for spreading a plague. One man goes to Pakistan on business, buys a bit of software, and brings it home to New York. He puts the disk in his office computer, and presto, the brain has moved into the building. Then a colleague borrows the disk, and the virus hitches a ride to another desk. Within weeks, the brain was traveling faster than a rumor in a small town. It crossed oceans, bypassed customs, and ignored all international treaties. I find it infinitely amusing that in an age where man is building Star Wars missile defenses and launching space stations, he can be brought to a standstill by a few lines of code written by 2 boys in a shop halfway around the world. We have spent billions of dollars building walls, and we forgot that the smallest door of all, the disk drive, was wide open. The symptom of hubris. What does a sick computer look like? It doesn't cough, and it doesn't need a hot toddy. Instead, it becomes lethargic. It takes 3 minutes to do a task that used to take 10 seconds. It begins to misplace its own thoughts. In short, it starts to act like a man who has had one too many gins at the club and can't quite remember where he left his umbrella. The panic that ensued was a sight to behold. People began to treat their computers like they were infested with actual physical vermin. There were reports of people trying to clean their disks with soap and water, which is a bit like trying to cure a headache by washing your hat. They didn't understand that the disease was invisible, a ghost in the machine, a sequence of ones and zeros that had forgotten their manners. I reckon the brain virus is the ultimate proof that man cannot build a world that is idiot-proof, mostly because the universe is so industrious at producing better idiots. We thought we had created a realm of pure logic, a digital paradise where everything was predictable and orderly. And then we realized that because we are the ones who wrote the logic, we have managed to bake our own flaws, our own pettiness, and our own accidental sneezes right into the cake. TwAIn's law of technology. Any machine sufficiently advanced to do your work for you is also sufficiently advanced to go on strike the moment you need it most. The irony of the invisible. There is a profound irony in the brain fever. We live in a world of increasingly massive things. The Mir space station, the Statue of Liberty, the great towering skyscrapers of Manhattan. Yet the things that truly change our history are getting smaller and smaller. In the 14th century, a tiny flea on a rat could topple an empire. In 1986, a tiny bit of code on a plastic disc can topple a corporation. We are being besieged by the invisible. We are terrified of things we cannot see, whether it is a virus in our blood or a virus in our motherboard, which, I might add, is a rather insulting name for a piece of green plastic. My own mother would never have allowed a virus in the house without at least giving it a good scolding. The Alvey brothers eventually received thousands of phone calls from all over the globe. People were calling them from America, from Europe, from Australia, all asking the same thing: how do I get your brain out of my box? They were shocked. They had no idea their protective measure would become a global sensation. They were like the man who invents a new kind of whistle and accidentally summons every dog in the hemisphere to his front porch. A lullaby for the infected. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you should say a small prayer for your own brain. Not the one in your head, though that one is likely cluttered enough with the nonsense of the day, but the digital ghosts that inhabit this modern world. We are entering an age where our history will no longer be written in ink on paper, but in flickering lights on a screen. And as long as man is the one doing the writing, there will be viruses. There will be mistakes and malice and accidental sneezes that travel around the world before the truth has even put its boots on. It is a comforting thought in a way. It means that no matter how high-tech we get, we will always be the same old muddling, bungling, brilliant fools we've always been. We can't even build a box of sand without giving it a soul, and a soul, by definition, is something that can get sick. So, turn off the lights. Let the computers hum their lonely, infected songs in the dark. Don't worry about the brain in the machine. It's just a reminder that even in the cold world of silicon, there's a bit of human nature lurking in the shadows, waiting to remind us that we aren't as smart as we think we are. Good night, and may your dreams be free of copy protection, and your morning be free of a digital headache. Chapter 6. The Invisible Fire of Chernobyl. I have always been a man who appreciates a good, honest fire. There is something wholesome about a blaze you can sit beside, poke with a stick, and use to light a cigar or warm a pot of coffee. In my riverboating days, fire was our temperamental servant. It lived in the belly of the ship, hissed and roared in the boilers, and occasionally, if the engineer was a man of more ambition than sense, it would decide to vacate the premises and take the entire boat with it. But even then, the danger was a gentlemanly one. It was visible. It was loud. It had the decency to announce its arrival with a bang and a shower of sparks. You knew exactly where you stood with a steamboat explosion. Usually, you stood in the middle of the river looking for a piece of driftwood. But in 1986, the human race, specifically a group of grim-faced gentlemen in the Soviet Union, managed to invent a fire that has no manners at all. They found a way to make fire invisible, silent, and capable of traveling through a stone wall without so much as knocking. They call it radiation. I call it the return of the ghost story, only this time the ghosts are wearing lab coats and carrying slide rules. The Experiment in the Dark. The scene of the crime was the Vladimir Ilyich Lenin nuclear power plant, located near a town called Chernobyl in the Ukraine. Now, naming a power plant after Lenin is a bit like naming a dynamite factory after a man who had a habit of smoking in bed. It sets a certain tone of inevitable excitement. On a late April night, a group of engineers decided to conduct a safety test. I have noticed that in the 20th century, the word safety is often used as a prefix for disaster. These fellows wanted to see what would happen if the power went out and the turbines were spinning on their own momentum. It was a bit like a man deciding to see if his carriage will still roll downhill if he shoots the horse. The problem is that a nuclear reactor is not a horse. It is a sleeping dragon that is kept in a state of perpetual, agitated dozing by a collection of control rods. If you pull out too many rods, the dragon wakes up. If you pull them out while the cooling water is turned off, the dragon doesn't just wake up. It decides to redecorate the neighborhood. At 1:23 in the morning, the dragon at reactor number 4 woke up with a vengeance. There was an explosion, yes, a massive, roof-lifting thump that sent a plume of graphite and fire into the night sky. But the explosion was just the doorbell. The real guest had arrived, and it was a silent enemy that would haunt the continent for decades. The blue glow of doom. In the immediate aftermath, the local residents of Pripyat, a town built specifically to house the workers of this Soviet paradise, did what any sensible person would do when they see a spectacular light show. They went out onto their balconies to watch. They saw a beautiful, shimmering pillar of blue light reaching into the heavens. It was ethereal. It was majestic. It was also a concentrated beam of invisible needles that were currently perforating their DNA like a Gatling gun. The Soviet authorities, in keeping with their long-standing tradition of, if we don't talk about it, it didn't happen, said absolutely nothing. They sent in firemen to put out the blaze, telling the poor lads it was just a regular roof fire. These men fought the invisible fire with water and courage, and within hours they began to turn nuclear tan, a shade of bronze that signifies your internal organs are currently being cooked from the inside out. It is a tragedy that defies laughter, and yet the absurdity of the bureaucracy provides a bitter sort of comedy. While the air was thick with the dust of 1,000 suns, the local Communist Party officials were busy signing papers and ensuring that the May Day parade in Kiev would go on as planned. They were more afraid of a frown from Moscow than they were of a cloud of isotopes that could melt a lead shield. The Swedish tattletale. The secret might have kept for weeks if it weren't for the fact that the atmosphere doesn't care about Soviet censorship. The wind took that invisible cloud and carried it north, across the border and into Sweden. At the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden, a technician walked into work and stepped through a radiation monitor. The alarm went off. He checked his boots. They were hot. He checked the floor. It was hot. Naturally, the Swedes assumed their own plant was leaking. They searched every pipe, every valve, and every bolt. They found nothing. Then they stepped outside and realized the entire sky was hot. The Swedes, being a practical people who don't care much for Soviet secrets, immediately rang the bell. "Pardon us," they said to the world, "but it appears the Soviet Union has had a bit of a mishap, and they've decided to share it with everyone from here to the North Pole." Only then did the Kremlin issue a brief three-sentence statement on the evening news, tucked between a report on tractor production and a forecast for rain. It was the ultimate understatement of the century. It was like announcing that the Great Flood was a period of increased humidity. The invisible enemy. What makes Chernobyl so peculiar to my 19th century mind is the terror of the unseen. In my day, we feared the miasma, the bad air from the swamps that we thought caused malaria and cholera. We eventually learned that those diseases were caused by germs, which were small, but could at least be seen under a microscope. But radiation? You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it. A man could be standing in a field of daisies, feeling the warm sun on his face, while a silent fire is ripping through his marrow. It is a superstition made real by modern science. It turns the very elements of life, the air, the water, the grass, into a conspiracy against the living. They had to evacuate Pripyat. 50,000 people were told to pack a suitcase for 3 days. They left their pets, their dinners on the table, and their lives on the shelves. They never went back. Today, Pripyat is a ghost town, where the only residents are the wolves and the trees growing through the floorboards of the schools. It is a monument to the moment man realized his progress had outpaced his wisdom. The liquidators. I must tip my hat to the liquidators, the soldiers, miners, and volunteers who were sent in to bury the beast. They were given lead aprons that weighed as much as a small calf and told to shovel radioactive debris off the roof. They could only stay up there for 90 seconds at a time. They were called bio-robots because the actual mechanical robots they tried to use kept having nervous breakdowns from the radiation. It turns out that when the world is ending, a machine will give up the ghost, but a man with a shovel and a sense of duty will keep digging until his hair falls out. It is the most noble and the most heartbreaking thing about our species. A lullaby for the atomic age. So, as you tuck yourself in tonight, be thankful for the visible world. Be thankful for the fire in the hearth that stays where you put it, and the air that doesn't require a Geiger counter to verify its friendship. The invisible fire of Chernobyl taught the world a lesson in humility. It proved that no matter how many safety tests we run, we are still just children playing with matches in a very large, very dry barn. We have traded the fear of old-world demons for the fear of unstable atoms, but the feeling in the pit of the stomach remains exactly the same. The cloud has long since dispersed, and the dragon at Reactor 4 is buried under a mountain of concrete and steel. But the lesson remains. Science is a wonderful servant, but a terrifying master. If you're going to wake a dragon, you'd best make sure you have a very long stick and a very fast horse. Good night, and may your dreams be free of blue glows and Swedish alarms. May your world be solid, your air be sweet, and your only invisible visitors be the pleasant ghosts of your own imagination. Chapter 7. Hands Across America. The American spirit is a curious and restless thing, constructed in equal parts of genuine compassion, unbridled optimism, and a desperate bone-deep need to be seen performing a miracle in a catchy T-shirt. We are a people who cannot simply help a neighbor move a piano without first organizing a parade, hiring a brass band, and declaring a National Piano Moving Awareness Week. I have always admired this about my countrymen. We have a talent for turning the most basic of human duties into a theatrical production that would make Barnum himself blush with envy. In May of 1986, this national impulse toward sentimental vanity reached its zenith with a spectacle called Hands Across America. The premise was as simple as it was staggeringly absurd. 5 million people were to stand in a line stretching 4,000 miles from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific, hold hands for 15 minutes, and sing a song. The goal was to raise money for the hungry and the homeless. Now, a more cynical man, perhaps a man who has spent too much time listening to politicians or watching the river rise, might suggest that if you want to feed a man, you should simply hand him a sandwich and a nickel. But in the 1980s, the sandwich is secondary to the gesture. The logistics of brotherhood. I have seen many a grand chain in my time. Chains for anchoring ships, chains for pulling stumps, and chains of logic that were usually missing several vital links. But a human chain across a continent is a feat of engineering that requires more than just goodwill. It requires a level of coordination usually reserved for invading a small European country. The organizers had to map out a path that bypassed mountains, avoided swampy bits where the participants might be eaten by alligators, and ensured that nobody was standing in the middle of a busy interstate highway unless they wanted to become a Hands Across America pancake. They had to recruit celebrities, men and women who are paid to look beautiful and pretend to be other people, to stand at key points, ensuring that the television cameras would have something more interesting to look at than a line of accountants in Ohio. I watched, from my comfortable perch in the great Elsewhere, as the clock struck 3 in the afternoon on the East Coast. Suddenly, the nation froze. From the Statue of Liberty, who, I might add, was looking remarkably well for a centenarian, all the way to the pier in Long Beach, the line formed. There were presidents and pop stars, nuns and bartenders, all linking fingers in a display of unity that lasted exactly long enough for the evening news to get the right shot. The unbroken chain with gaps. The organizers claimed the chain was unbroken. This is what we call a stretcher on the river. It is a polite way of saying that the truth has been massaged until it is unrecognizable. In the more populous regions such as New York or Chicago, the line was so thick with humanity that people were practically crawling over one another to hold a hand. But as the line moved west into the great, dusty heart of the country, things got a bit thin. In the deserts of the Southwest, the unbroken chain looked remarkably like a series of lonely individuals standing half a mile apart, waving at the tumbleweeds. I am told that in some sections they had to use lengths of rope to bridge the gaps. Nothing says human brotherhood quite like holding on to a greasy piece of hemp because the next brother is 20 miles away at a gas station buying a grape soda. There were even reports of people hiring stand-ins, paying someone else to hold hands for them. It is the ultimate modern convenience. Outsource your compassion for only $10 a head. The cost of compassion. Now, let us talk about the filthy lucre, the money. The event raised some $34 million. That sounds like a king's ransom until you realize that it cost nearly $20 million to stage the event. They spent millions on advertisements, millions on T-shirts, and millions on hiring people to tell other people how important it was to hold hands. When the dust settled, the hungry and the homeless received about $15 million. To put that in perspective, the American people spent $20 million to give away 15. It is a bit like spending $50 on a fancy box, a velvet ribbon, and a tuxedo-clad messenger just to deliver a $10 gold piece to a beggar. It is magnificent theater, but as a business model, it leaves a bit to be desired. I find a great deal of humor in the fact that many of the people holding hands for 15 minutes to end hunger then immediately went to a restaurant and complained about the service. We are a people who can be moved to tears by a song, yet we cannot be moved to speak to the man sleeping on the park bench we walk past every morning. We prefer our charity at a distance, 4,000 miles of distance to be exact, where it doesn't require us to actually know the name of the person we're helping. The song of the hour. And of course, there was the song. In the 1980s, you cannot do anything without a theme song. It was a swelling, inspirational tune that informed us that we are the world. Wait, that was a different year's Vanity. And that we were making a brand new day. Music is a powerful thing. It can make a man feel like he's a saint even while he's stealing his neighbor's woodpile. For 15 minutes, as the nation sang and swayed, everyone felt a warm, tingly glow of righteousness. It was a national high, a collective delusion that we had somehow solved the problem of poverty by joining palms. But gravity and human nature always wins. The 15 minutes ended. The hands were dropped. The celebrities retreated to their limousines, the accountants went back to their ledgers, and the desert once again belonged to the tumbleweeds and the ropes. The brand new day looked remarkably like the old day, only with more discarded T-shirts and a few more sunburns. The vanity of the gesture. I do not mean to be entirely unkind. There is something touching about 5 million people wanting to do something good, even if they don't quite know how to go about it. It shows that the heart of the country is still in the right place, even if the brain is occasionally out to lunch. But I cannot help but observe the grand sentimental vanity of it all. We love the big event. We love the one-time only spectacular. We would rather stand in a line across the country than spend 10 minutes every Tuesday helping at a soup kitchen. The soup kitchen is dull. There are no cameras there, and nobody gives you a commemorative pin. Hands Across America was the ultimate 1986 moment. It was flashy, it was expensive, it was star-studded, and it was entirely fleeting. It was a monument made of people, a living bridge that evaporated the moment the on-air light went out. A lullaby for the connected. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you should reach out and hold the hand of whoever is nearby, provided they are willing and you aren't in a crowded elevator where such a thing might lead to a lawsuit. We are all part of a chain, whether we choose to stand in a line or not. We are linked by our follies, our hopes, and our shared habit of spending $20 to do $15 worth of good. It is a messy, inefficient, and utterly human way to live. The world is still hungry, and the line has long since broken. But for one brief, ridiculous quarter of an hour in 1986, America tried to hold on to itself. It didn't work, of course, but the attempt was worth a laugh and a bit of a sigh. Good night, and may your dreams be free of long lines and empty deserts. And if you feel the urge to save the world tomorrow, start with the fellow at the end of your own street. He probably doesn't need a song, but he might appreciate a sandwich and you won't even have to buy a T-shirt to give it to him. Chapter 8. The Winged Legend of Zelda. In my day, if a boy wanted to embark on a grand adventure, he had to go through the considerable labor of actually leaving the house. He had to negotiate with the mud, avoid the local constable, and perhaps find a raft of questionable structural integrity to float down a river. It was a dusty, sweaty, and occasionally damp business that required a sturdy pair of boots and a complete lack of common sense. But in 1986, I have observed that the American child has found a way to achieve heroism without ever having to wash behind his ears. He does this by plugging a gray plastic toaster into his television set, a device called the Nintendo Entertainment System, and entering a world made of light, noise, and a peculiar kind of electronic sorcery. In February of this year, a Japanese gentleman by the name of Shigeru Miyamoto, a fellow who clearly possesses a brain that is part garden, part clockwork, released a thing called The Legend of Zelda. It arrived in a box of burnished gold, looking for all the world like a lost treasure from a pirate's hoard. And within that gold, there was a private mythology that has managed to capture the imagination of every child in the country, turning them into silent, blinking statues in front of the hearth. The hero in the green nightgown. The story is one that is as old as the hills. A young lad must save a princess from a wicked sorcerer. But the lad in question, a fellow named Link, is a curious sort of protagonist. He wears a green tunic that looks remarkably like a nightgown, a pointed hat that would get him laughed out of any respectable saloon in Virginia City, and he possesses the conversational skills of a stump. He never says a word. He simply grunts when he's hit and swings a sword at anything that moves, mostly bushes and ceramic pots. I find this slashing of the shrubbery to be the most fascinating part of the whole enterprise. In this world of Hyrule, if you are short on cash, you don't go looking for a job or a loan. You simply go out into the yard and whack a bush with a stick. Lo and behold, a gold coin, called a rupee, will pop out of the dirt like a magic bean. If I had known in my youth that one could finance a life of adventure by simply performing aggressive landscaping, I would have spent a great deal more time in the garden and a great deal less time worrying about my creditors. It is a marvelous economic system, though I suspect it would lead to a very tidy but very broke nation if applied to the real world. The miracle of the save. But the truly revolutionary thing about this golden box, the thing that makes me want to tip my hat and perhaps ask for a refund on my own life, is the save feature. You see, until 1986, if you played an electronic game, you were engaged in a battle of attrition. If you lost, you were sent back to the beginning, stripped of your dignity and your progress, forced to repeat your failures until you either succeeded or threw the machine out the window. But Zelda was different. It contained a small silver battery nestled inside the plastic, a tiny heart that kept beating even when the power was turned off. This meant that a boy could go to bed, dream of dragons, and wake up the next morning exactly where he left off. He didn't lose his treasures. He didn't lose his map. He could save his life. I cannot tell you how much I envy that little silver battery. I have made enough mistakes in my life to fill a dozen volumes, investments that went south, books that didn't sell, and remarks I probably shouldn't have made at dinner parties. If I could have hit a save button in 1885, I might still be a wealthy man today. Imagine being able to walk into a disastrous business meeting, realize it was a catastrophe, and then simply reset the world to the moment before you walked through the door. It is the ultimate human fantasy, the ability to keep the gold and discard the bruises. The geography of the screen. The world of Hyrule is a vast and labyrinthine place, filled with forests, deserts, mountains, and dungeons. It is a map that must be learned inch by inch, just like the snags and sandbars of the Mississippi. But while the river is always changing, Hyrule is eternal. Every rock is in its place. Every secret cave is waiting to be found by the man with enough bombs to blow it open. I have watched children spend hours drawing their own maps on graph paper, plotting the location of heart containers, which are literally the hero's life kept in a red glass jar. It is a strange thing to think that your vitality can be measured in a row of blinking hearts. When you get hit by a monster, a heart disappears. When you eat a fairy, it comes back. I've met a few fairies in my time, usually in the form of a good doctor or a very generous lender, but they were never quite as reliable as the ones Link finds in a bottle. In 1986, health is not a matter of diet or exercise. It's a matter of catching a sparkling Sprite in a glass jar. The private mythology. What interests me most, however, is not the gameplay, as the moderns call it, but the way this little box has created a shared language. You can go to any schoolyard in America and shout, "It's dangerous to go alone, take this," and every child will know exactly what you mean. They are all participants in the same grand myth. They are all in their own minds. The boy in the green hat. We are seeing the birth of a new kind of folklore. In the old days, we had King Arthur and Robin Hood. Now, we have Link and the Triforce. It is a mythology that fits in a pocket and can be carried to a friend's house in a backpack. It is a digital campfire where the stories are told not with words, but with the pressing of A and B buttons. I worry occasionally that these children are spending too much time saving princesses and not enough time getting their knees dirty in the real world. But then I remember my own youth, how I would disappear into a book for days, living 1,000 lives that weren't my own. This Nintendo is just a book that moves. It is a story that requires you to participate in your own rescue. The Golden Trap. Of course, there is a dark side to this electronic obsession. I have seen boys turn pale and wild-eyed after 4 hours of searching for the level 9 dungeon. They become irritable when told it is time for dinner. They look at the real world, the world of chores and math homework and vegetables, and they find it lacking. Why should a boy go out and pull real weeds for no reward when he can go into Hyrule and find gold under a digital bush? We are training a generation to expect a reward for every action and a save point for every mistake. I fear for the day they discover that the real world has no reset button, and that if you blow up your neighbor's wall looking for a secret passage, he is unlikely to offer you a heart container in return. He is more likely to offer you a lawsuit. A lullaby for the hero. So, as you tuck yourself in tonight, be thankful that your own life doesn't require you to carry a wooden shield and fight a two-headed dragon just to get to the grocery store. The Legend of Zelda is a beautiful, glittering lie, a promise that adventure is easy, that gold is plentiful, and that death is merely a temporary setback that can be cured by a battery-backed memory. It is a grand comedy of pixels and bleeps. But as I watch a young lad finally defeat the great pig Ganon and rescue the princess, I see a look of pure, unadulterated triumph on his face. He has conquered a world. He has navigated a maze. He has been a hero in his own living room. And perhaps, in a world as complicated and confusing as 1986, that is exactly what a boy needs before he closes his eyes and enters the greatest save point of all, sleep. Good night, and remember, it's dangerous to go alone. Take a warm blanket, soft pillow, and perhaps a small light to ward off the monsters. The princess can wait until morning. Chapter 9. The Centennial of the Lady. I have always found that there is no vanity quite like the vanity of a monument, and no monument quite as prone to the weather as a lady made of copper. I was present in spirit, if not in sober body, when the Statue of Liberty was first hoisted onto her pedestal in 1886. At the time, she was the color of a new penny and twice as shiny, a gift from the French, a nation that, as I have often observed, changes its governments as frequently as a sensible man changes his socks, but remains steadfast in its devotion to large, symbolic gestures that involve a great deal of scaffolding. Now, exactly 100 years later, I find myself returning to New York Harbor to witness her centennial. It is July of 1986, and the American people have decided that the only way to celebrate 100 years of liberty is to throw a 4-day party so loud, so bright, and so expensive that it would make the Roman Empire look like a quiet afternoon at a library. The Great Copper Facelift. Before the party could begin, the lady had to undergo a restoration. It appears that a century of salty Atlantic air and New York pigeons had taken a toll on her complexion. She had turned a dignified shade of seafoam green, a color that in a human would suggest a terminal case of seasickness, but in a statue is considered patina. They spent $277 million to fix her up. To a man of my era, that is an amount of money that defies the imagination. It is enough to buy the entire state of Missouri and still have enough left over to provide every citizen with a gold-plated toothpick. They put her in a cage of scaffolding that made her look like she was caught in a very expensive bird trap, and they went to work. The centerpiece of this makeover was the torch. The old one leaked, a metaphor for government if ever I heard one, so they replaced it with a brand new one covered in 24-karat gold leaf. Now, when the sun hits that flame, it shines with a brilliance that is enough to blind a passing seagull. I suppose if you're going to stand in a harbor for 100 years, the least you could ask for is a bit of jewelry that doesn't rust. The Salesman of Liberty. The man in charge of the fundraising was a fellow named Lee Iacocca. Now, Mr. Iacocca is a man who could sell a fur coat to a volcano. He is the king of the Chrysler Carriage Works, and he approached the restoration of liberty with the same fervor he uses to sell a minivan. He turned the statue into a brand. He sold Liberty commemorative coins, Liberty stamps, and Liberty everything else. I find a certain grim humor in the fact that we had to use the methods of a used car salesman to preserve the symbol of our highest ideals. It is the American way. If you want to save your soul, you must first ensure there's a sponsorship deal with a soft drink company. Liberty Weekend, the greatest show on earth. The celebration itself, dubbed Liberty Weekend, was orchestrated by a man named David Wolper, a producer of spectacles. In my day, a spectacle was a man falling off a horse or a particularly vigorous church social. In 1986, a spectacle involves 30,000 fireworks, a fleet of tall ships, and enough laser beams to make the moon feel self-conscious. I sat on the deck of a spectral steamboat, the only way for a gentleman of my standing to travel, and watched the parade of ships. There were vessels from every corner of the globe, grand masted beauties that looked like they had sailed right out of the 19th century to remind the modern world what a real ship looks like. They call them the tall ships, which is a polite way of saying they are obsolete but very pretty. Watching those sails catch the wind in the harbor, I felt a pang of nostalgia. For a brief moment, the smoke from the tugboats and the hum of the helicopters faded away, and it felt like 1886 again. But then a B-1 bomber flew overhead with a roar that sounded like the end of the world, and I was reminded that we are no longer in the age of canvas and hemp. We are in the age of aluminum and noise. The President and the Flame. The guest of honor was President Ronald Reagan. He stood on the deck of the USS Iowa and with a flick of a switch relit the lady's torch. Mr. Reagan is a man who understands the power of a good backdrop. He looked at that statue with a gaze so sincere it could melt butter at 50 paces. He spoke of the huddled masses and the golden door. It was a fine speech, delivered with the practiced ease of a man who has spent his life speaking to cameras. But as I watched the fireworks explode in a riot of red, white, and blue, I couldn't help but think about how much those huddled masses have changed. The Statue of Liberty is a monument to an idea, but the party was a monument to the American appetite for ballyhoo. Extract from the Journals of Mark Twain, 1986. The Huddled Masses, Designer Version. In 1886, the people who arrived at the lady's feet were carrying their lives in a wooden crate. They were fleeing hunger and kings and the kind of poverty that makes a man consider his boots a luxury. They looked at that copper torch and saw a promise of bread and a chance to work until their backs broke. In 1986, the masses are still arriving, but the world has shrunk. Now they arrive on silver wings, and they aren't just looking for bread. They're looking for the American dream, which in this decade seems to involve a suburban house, a VCR, and a pair of jeans with a Frenchman's name on the back pocket. The irony is as thick as a New York fog. We celebrate liberty with a 4-day extravaganza, yet we are more obsessed than ever with security. We have censors and guards and bureaucracy that would make a czar weep with frustration. We love the idea of the open door, but we've added a very complicated series of locks and a peephole. The fireworks of absurdity. The final night of the centennial featured the largest fireworks display in the history of the world. It was a magnificent, thunderous madness. For 20 minutes, the night sky over New York was turned into a kaleidoscope of fire. It was as if the stars had decided to have a domestic dispute and were throwing their china at one another. I watched as a giant 100 was etched in the sky in sparks. People wept. They hugged. They sang the Star-Spangled Banner with a fervor that suggested they had all personally built the statue with their own hands. And then the show was over. The smoke drifted away. The lasers were turned off, and the 5 million people who had crowded the shoreline went home to their microwave dinners. The lady was left alone in the dark again, looking very shiny in her new gold leaf, but still carrying that heavy book and looking out at the sea. I wonder if she appreciates the party. If I were a statue, I think I would find it all a bit much. I would prefer a quiet conversation with a passing whale to 30,000 explosions and a speech by a car salesman. A lullaby for the centenarian. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, give a thought to the lady in the harbor. She is 100 years old, and she has seen it all. She has seen the arrival of the steamship and the departure of the shuttle. She has seen the city grow from a cluster of brownstones into a forest of glass and steel. We are a nation that loves a birthday, especially when the birthday girl is too old to complain about the noise. We spent $277 million to make her look young again, but underneath the gold leaf and the new rivets, she is still the same old copper gal, reminding us that liberty is a slow, difficult business that requires a lot of maintenance and the occasional total restoration. Good night, and try to dream in red, white, and blue. Don't worry about the huddled masses. They're all at the mall, buying commemoratives. The torch is lit, the party is over, and the lady is watching the tide. Chapter 10. The Need for Speed. I have spent a considerable portion of my life in pursuit of velocity, though my definitions of the term would likely strike a modern citizen as somewhat leisurely. In the golden age of the Mississippi, we thought we were tempting Providence if we managed to coax a steamboat into traveling 18 miles an hour. If the boilers didn't explode and the current was in our favor, we felt like we were riding a lightning bolt. Later, the steam locomotive promised us 60 miles an hour, a speed so dizzying that many learned physicians of the day feared a woman's soul might be left behind on the platform, unable to keep pace with her physical person. But in 1986, the American appetite for going fast has mutated into something altogether more frantic and much more expensive. The nation has fallen under the spell of a cinematic spectacular called Top Gun, a film that serves as a 90-minute advertisement for the United States Navy, and a 2-hour advertisement for the sheer, unadulterated vanity of the American male. The young man in the aviator glasses. The protagonist of this melodrama is a young fellow named Tom Cruise, who possesses a smile that appears to have been fashioned out of polished porcelain and a level of self-assurance that usually requires either a large inheritance or a total lack of imagination. In the film, he plays a character named Maverick. Now, in my day, a maverick was an unbranded calf that wandered the plains looking for a mother, a creature that was generally destined to end up as a steak or a very confused cow. In 1986, a maverick is a man who flies a $40 million fighter jet like he's trying to parallel park a buggy in a crowded stable. He is a rebel who follows the rules just enough to keep his job, but breaks them just enough to ensure the cool kids think he's a hero. The uniform of this new era of speed is the flight suit. I have seen men in my time wear many things to look important. Military tunics with enough gold braid to sink a skiff, top hats that reached for the rafters, and even the occasional ceremonial robe. But the flight suit is a different beast entirely. It is a one-piece garment that suggests at any moment you might be called upon to catapult yourself into the stratosphere, even if you are actually just going to the grocery store for a loaf of bread and a tin of sardines. And then there are the aviator glasses. These are large mirrored spectacles that cover half the face, ensuring that no one can see your eyes. It is a brilliant invention for a man who wants to look mysterious, or for a man who hasn't slept in 3 days and doesn't want the world to know he's seeing double. In 1986, you cannot be a hero unless your eyes are hidden behind a wall of dark glass. The flying steam engines. The real stars of the film, however, are the F-14 Tomcats. These are not airplanes in the sense that the Wright brothers intended. They are screaming metal predators that drink kerosene like a sailor drinks rum and move at speeds that turn the atmosphere into a solid wall. I watched the aerial dogfights with a mixture of awe and motion sickness. The pilots talked to one another through radios, using names like Iceman, Goose, and Slider, names that sound like they were stolen from a particularly imaginative gang of street urchins. They fly upside down. They buzz towers, a maneuver that involves terrifying an air traffic controller for no reason other than a lack of mature hobbies. And they constantly inform one another that they feel the need for speed. I find this need to be a curious psychological condition. Why do we need to move at Mach 2? Is the world so dull that we must fly through it at twice the speed of sound just to feel alive? Or is it simply that we are trying to run away from ourselves? If you are moving at 1,500 miles an hour, your problems can't possibly keep up with you. Your creditors, your conscience, and your ex-wife are all left far behind in the danger zone. The volleyball mystery. Perhaps the most inexplicable scene in the entire film involves no airplanes at all. It is a volleyball game. I have seen many sports in my time. Prize fights that lasted 40 rounds, horse races that bankrupted counties, and even the occasional game of croquet that ended in a duel. No, I have never seen anything quite like the Top Gun volleyball game. A group of grown men, glistening with an amount of sweat that suggests they have been recently dipped in a vat of olive oil, play a game of volleyball in blue jeans. Yes, blue jeans. I have worn denim in my day. It is a sturdy fabric meant for mining gold or having a fist fight in a muddy alley. It is not, by any stretch of the imagination, athletic wear. To play a sport in denim while covered in grease is a level of commitment to looking cool that verges on the pathological. It serves no purpose in the plot, it does not help win the war, and it likely leads to a catastrophic case of chafing. Yet, for the American audience of 1986, it was the pinnacle of human achievement. It was the moment they realized that being a pilot wasn't about flying, it was about the glisten. The marketing of bravado. The Navy, I am told, set up recruitment booths right inside the theaters, and it worked. Thousands of young men walked out of the cinema still dazzled by the Danger Zone theme song and signed their lives away to Uncle Sam, hoping to get a pair of those mirrored glasses and a chance to sweat in the sun. They didn't realize, of course, that the actual Navy involves a great deal more mopping of decks and waiting in lines than it does riding motorcycles into the sunset. But that is the power of the need for speed. It turns a deadly difficult profession into a fashion statement. It makes the prospect of being shot at seem like a reasonable trade-off for a high-quality leather jacket with a lot of patches on it. The theology of cool. We are witnessing the rise of a new religion in this decade, the cult of cool. In my time, a man was judged by his character, his word, and perhaps the quality of his wit. In 1986, a man is judged by his attitude. To be cool is to be indifferent to danger, to wear your collar turned up, and to never ever let them see you blink. It is an exhausting way to live. I have tried being cool once or twice, usually after a particularly successful lecture tour when I felt like the king of the world, but I always found that the effort of maintaining the pose was far greater than the reward. I would much rather be warm and comfortable than cool and sweaty in denim. A lullaby for the aviator. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, let the sound of the jet engines fade from your mind. You do not need to move at Mach 2. You do not need to win a volleyball game against a man named Iceman, and you certainly do not need to wear mirrored glasses in the dark. The need for speed is a frantic, fluttery thing, a heartbeat that never slows down. But the night is for slow. The night is for the pace of a drifting raft on a quiet river where the only danger zone is a particularly soft pillow. America in 1986 is moving too fast, and its hair is held in place by too much spray. But underneath all that bravado, it's just a nation of people looking for a hero to tell them they're special. You are special enough just by lying still and letting the world spin without your help for a few hours. Good night, Maverick. Turn off the afterburners. Put your flight suit in the hamper and try to dream in a speed that doesn't require a parachute. The ground is a friendly place after all. It's where the beds are. Chapter 11. The Vancouver Transit Expo. I have always been a sucker for a World's Fair. There is something about the collective ego of the human race gathered in one spot to brag about its latest knickknacks that warms the cockles of my cynical heart. I spent a goodly portion of my previous life wandering through the white palaces of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, marveling at the fact that man had finally invented a way to light a building without setting the curtains on fire. A World's Fair is essentially a giant attic, where humanity displays its favorite toys for 6 months before realizing they are entirely impractical and burying them in a museum. In the summer of 1986, I found myself drawn to the rugged, rain-washed shores of Vancouver, a city in British Columbia that appears to have been built on a dare between a mountain range and a pine forest. They were hosting Expo 86, and the theme was World in Motion, World in Touch. Now, I have been in motion for a century and a half, and I have been in touch with more creditors than a man of my temperament should ever have to endure, so I felt uniquely qualified to judge the proceedings. As I drifted through the gates, I realized that I wasn't just walking into a fair. I was walking into a very expensive, very shiny funeral for the 19th century. The Sky Train, a horizontal elevator for the impatient. The centerpiece of this world in motion was a thing called the Sky Train. In my day, a train was a respectable, earthbound creature that announced its presence with a roar and a cloud of soot that could blacken a laundry line from 3 miles away. But the Sky Train is a modern marvel, or a modern mischief, depending on your view. It is a driverless automated carriage that hums along a concrete track high above the streets. It is, in effect, a horizontal elevator, and like an elevator, it possesses no soul. There is no engineer leaning out the window with a grease-stained cap. There is only a silent computer somewhere in a basement, making decisions based on mathematics and cold logic. I watched the citizens of 1986 board this machine with a look of bored indifference. They didn't seem to realize the sheer, terrifying magic of a ton of metal hurtling through the air without a human hand at the tiller. They simply sat there, staring at their reflections in the glass, probably wondering if they had left the microwave on. We have reached a point where progress is so common that it has become a chore. If a man in 1850 had seen a sky train, he would have fallen to his knees and declared the day of judgment. A man in 1986 just complains that the doors didn't open fast enough. The Steam Expo, a gathering of old friends. However, the organizers of Expo 86 had a momentary lapse of modernity and decided to host a Steam Expo. For a few glorious weeks, they gathered dozens of the world's great steam locomotives in one place. Walking among them was like attending a reunion of old riverboat captains. I saw the great iron horses of the CPR, the gargantuan machines that had conquered the Canadian Rockies, looking like sleeping dragons made of coal and grease. I could smell it, that glorious pungent cocktail of hot oil, wet coal, and raw power. A steam engine is an honest machine. It doesn't hide its intentions behind a microchip. If it's angry, it hisses. If it's working, it thumps. If it's exhausted, it sighs. It is a living, breathing entity that requires a human touch to keep it from behaving badly. I stood beside a 19th century locomotive and felt a deep spiritual kinship. We were both relics of an age where movement required effort, where going fast meant you had to burn something real, and where the destination was never as interesting as the struggle to get there. I noticed a young man in a neon windbreaker looking at a steam engine with an expression of mild disgust. "It's so dirty," he remarked to his companion. "My dear lad," I wanted to say, though being a ghost makes such interjections difficult, "that dirt is the residue of a century that built the very world you are currently standing on. Without that soot, you wouldn't have your sky train, your Walkman, or your Hairspray. You are looking at the grandfather of your civilization, and you ought to tip your hat before you catch a spark in your eye." Highway 86, the graveyard of movement. One of the most peculiar sights at the fair was an art installation called Highway 86. It was a long, undulating ribbon of gray concrete that rose out of the water and curved through the fairgrounds. On this road, everything was painted a uniform, ghostly gray. Cars, motorcycles, bicycles, airplanes, and even a pair of shoes. It looked like a traffic jam in purgatory. It was meant to represent the history of transportation, but to me, it looked like a warning. It was as if the 20th century had suddenly realized it had too many toys and decided to dip them all in cement to keep them from getting away. It was a silent, motionless monument to our obsession with going. We spent our lives building the things to move us from point A to point B, and Highway 86 showed us that eventually point B is just a gray road where everything stops forever. It was a bit of a downer for a summer festival, but I suppose every party needs a skeleton at the feast to keep the guests from getting too arrogant. the Battle of the Pavilions. The pavilions were the usual exercise in national bragging. The USSR Pavilion was a massive, somber affair filled with space capsules and stern-faced photographs of men with impressive mustaches. They wanted you to know that they were very serious about the future, and that if the future involved living in a pressurized tin can, they were the ones for the job. The USA Pavilion, on the other hand, was an explosion of communication. They had screens everywhere, television screens, computer screens, screens that showed other screens. It was a sensory assault designed to prove that while the Russians might own the vacuum of space, the Americans owned the vacuum of the human mind. They were selling the global village, a concept that suggests we will all soon be neighbors because we can all see the same laundry detergent commercials at the same time. I wandered into the China Pavilion where they were showing off a bronze chariot from the Qin dynasty. It was 2,000 years old and still looked more reliable than a 1986 Yugo automobile. It was a quiet reminder that while the rest of us are busy inventing sky trains and Pixar doodles, some civilizations have been in motion since before the Roman Empire had its first headache. The high-tech funeral. As the sun set over the Burrard Inlet, turning the water into a sheet of hammered copper, I realized why Expo 86 felt so strange to me. It was the moment the 19th century finally gave up the ghost. Until 1986, we still had a foot in the world of iron and steam. But here in Vancouver, the world was announcing its new allegiance to the invisible. The future wasn't going to be built with hammers and coal. It was going to be built with data, pulses, and waves. The world in touch meant that we wouldn't need to travel to see our friends. We would just send our ghosts to visit them via a wire. It is a cleaner world, I suppose. There is less soot on the collar and less grease on the hands. But I can't help but feel that we are losing the roar. A world that hums is a world that is keeping secrets. A steam engine tells you everything. A computer tells you only what it wants you to know. A lullaby for the stationary. So, as you tuck yourself in tonight, be thankful that you aren't currently hurtling through the air on a driverless sky train or standing in a gray traffic jam in purgatory. Man is a creature that loves to move, even when he has nowhere in particular to go. We build fairs to celebrate the fact that we can get to Vancouver faster than our grandfathers could get to the next county. But at the end of the day, the greatest transit of all is the one that takes you from the noise of the world to the quiet of your own dreams. Expo 86 was a grand, expensive, and utterly beautiful way to say goodbye to the old world. It was a funeral with fireworks, a wake with a monorail. And as I watched the last of the crowds head for the exits, I realized that I didn't mind being a ghost. In a world in touch, being a ghost is practically a professional qualification. Good night, and may your dreams be in motion, but your bed be in place. Don't worry about the future. It's already been calculated, rendered, and painted gray. Just close your eyes and let the old steam engines of your imagination take you wherever you need to go. The ticket is free, and the soot won't stain the sheets. Chapter 12. The Oprah Era begins. In the days when the Mississippi was the only reliable news service we had, the American campfire was a literal thing. It was a circle of flickering light carved out of a very large and very dark woods where men gathered to swap lies, stretch the truth until it groaned, and occasionally share a bit of genuine wisdom. We told stories about ghosts, about gold mines that didn't exist, and about Paul Bunyan's blue ox. The goal was rarely to reveal one's inner self, a concept that would have struck a 19th century riverboat pilot as a form of mental derangement, but rather to entertain the company and keep the mosquitoes at bay. But as I drift through the parlor of 1986, I have observed that the campfire has been moved indoors, shrunk down to a 19-inch diagonal, and given a national syndication deal. In September of this year, a woman named Oprah Winfrey went national, and in doing so, she fundamentally altered the way Americans talk to one another. She has turned the entire country into one giant, weeping, nodding confessional circle. We have traded the tall tale for the tearful truth, and I am not entirely certain that the trade was in our favor. The queen of the parlor. Now I must give credit where it is due. Miss Winfrey is a phenomenon. She possesses a level of empathy that is almost geological in its scale. She doesn't just interview a person, she emotionally inhabits them. When she leans forward on her yellow sofa and says, "And how did that make you feel?" the person across from her usually disintegrates into a puddle of honesty that would make a seasoned lawyer break out in a cold sweat. In my time, if you had a secret, say, a peculiar fondness for your neighbor's prize hog or a slight tendency toward embezzlement, you took that secret to your grave, or at the very least, to a very trusted and very drunk friend. In 1986, you take that secret to a television studio in Chicago, tell it to a woman in a power suit, and broadcast it to 15 million people while they are folding their socks. It is the secular revival. In the old days, the traveling preacher would set up a tent and demand you confess your sins to save your soul from the fire. Now, Oprah sets up a studio and demands you confess your traumas to save your self-esteem from the suburbs. The result is the same. A great deal of sobbing, a sense of collective catharsis, and a collection plate that is remarkably full by the end of the hour. The commodity of the heartbreak. What fascinates me most is the pacing of the modern confession. On the Oprah Winfrey Show, the human soul is broken down into segments of approximately 12 minutes, separated by messages from our sponsors. Imagine, if you will, a woman describing the tragic loss of her childhood innocence, her eyes glistening with genuine pain. The music swells. Oprah reaches out to pat her hand. The audience gasps. And then, with the precision of a guillotine, a cheerful voice interrupts to tell us that Tide detergent now has extra whitening power, and that we should consider buying a new kind of light beer that tastes like water but has fewer bubbles. We have managed to turn human suffering into a very effective delivery system for laundry soap. It is a brilliant bit of business, though I suspect it does something strange to the American psyche. We are being trained to think that every tragedy has a commercial break, and that no matter how deep the grief, there is a consumer product nearby that can help tidy up the mess. A man who tells his secrets for free is a fool. A man who tells them for a national audience is a celebrity. But the man who sells the soap in between is a genius. Notes from the Ledger of Mark Twain, 1986. The death of the private life. I have often said that a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its boots. But in the Oprah era, the truth doesn't need boots. It has a satellite hookup. We are seeing the birth of the public-private life. There is no longer any shame in having a problem. In fact, having a problem is the primary qualification for being interesting. If you are a person who simply goes to work, pays your taxes, and treats your family with quiet respect, you are of no use to daytime television. You are boring. To be a star in 1986, you must have a journey. You must have a struggle. You must have a breakthrough. I worry about a world where everyone is a protagonist in their own televised melodrama. When everyone is shouting their secrets from the rooftops, nobody is listening to the quiet truth in the basement. We are becoming a nation of oversharers. I once knew a man in Hannibal who couldn't help but tell you about his gout every time he saw you. We avoided him like the plague. In 1986, that man would have a book deal and a 3-episode arc on afternoon TV. The aha moment. Miss Winfrey has popularized a phrase, the aha moment. It is that sudden flash of clarity when a person realizes why they have spent the last 20 years being miserable. I have had several aha moments in my life. Most of them involved realizing that a particular investment was a bottomless pit, or that I had accidentally insulted a man who owned a very large dog. But Oprah's aha moments are different. They are spiritual. They involve connecting with your inner child. Another 1980s concept that I find deeply suspicious. If I ever met my inner child, I would likely give him a lecture on the importance of saving his pennies and tell him to stay away from the publishing business. Yet I cannot deny the power of the spectacle. There is something deeply moving about seeing a room full of strangers realize they are not alone in their follies. The American campfire used to be about the story. Now it is about the connection. We are a lonely people, despite all our sky trains and Nintendos, and Oprah provides a digital hug that lasts just long enough to get us through to the evening news. The National Therapy Session. By the end of 1986, the Oprah era was in full swing. The other networks, seeing the success of this empathetic juggernaut, began to scramble. Soon, we will have a dozen different shows where people argue with their ex-husbands, reveal the results of paternity tests, and throw chairs at one another. But Oprah remains the high priestess. She has realized that the American public doesn't just want to be entertained. It wants to be validated. It wants to be told that its feelings are important, that its journey is significant, and that it deserves a free car, though that particular miracle is still a few years away. A lullaby for the validated. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, turn off the blue glow of the national campfire. You do not need to have an aha moment before morning. You do not need to confess your secrets to a studio audience, and you certainly do not need to worry about your inner child. He's probably fast asleep and dreaming of a world without shoulder pads. The 20th century is a noisy, confessional, and occasionally exhausting place to be. We have traded our privacy for a sense of belonging and our silence for a segment. But in the quiet of your own room, the only host is your own conscience, and the only commercial break is the steady rhythmic beating of your own heart. Good night, and may your dreams be your own private property, free of syndication rights and laundry detergent advertisements. You are wonderful just the way you are, even if you don't have a book deal yet. The fire is out, the audience has gone home, and the yellow sofa is empty. Sleep well and let the secrets of the world keep themselves for a few hours. Chapter 13. The Voyager's Long Breath. I have spent a significant portion of my existence marveling at the various ways man has devised to circumvent the inconveniences of geography. In my youth, the goal was to get from St. Louis to New Orleans without the boat hitting a snag or the boiler deciding to distribute the passengers across 3 different parishes. Later, we laid iron rails across the plains so that a man could cross the continent in a week, provided he didn't mind breathing soot and eating biscuits that had the structural integrity of a brick. But in December of 1986, I witnessed a feat of navigation that makes a Mississippi crossing look like a stroll to the corner apothecary. 2 souls by the names of Dick Rutan and Gina Yeager decided to fly around the entire circumference of the Earth without stopping for fuel, without stopping for a sandwich, and, most impressively, without stopping to kill one another. They did this in a machine called the Voyager, an aircraft that looks less like a triumph of engineering and more like a collection of 3 canoes and a set of oversized knitting needles held together by hope and a very high grade of glue. The flying gas tank. The Voyager was designed by Dick's brother, Bert Rutan, a man who clearly looks at a traditional airplane and thinks, this has far too much dignity and not nearly enough opportunities for structural failure. The craft was essentially a flying gas tank. Every spare inch of its hollow, spindly frame was filled with fuel. It was made of composite materials, carbon fiber and paper honeycomb, which is a fancy way of saying it was a very expensive, very light kite. It weighed less than a mid-sized car, but had a wingspan longer than a bridge. In my day, if you wanted to travel long distances, you wanted mass. You wanted a ship with heavy timbers and a thick hull to withstand the temper of the sea. But the modern philosophy is exactly the opposite. To conquer the sky, you must be as flimsy as a dragonfly and as light as a politician's promise. The takeoff of terror. On the morning of December 14th, at Edwards Air Force Base, the Voyager prepared to depart. It was so heavy with fuel that the wings, those long, delicate needles, actually sagged until they touched the ground. As Dick Rutan accelerated down the runway, the tips of the wings scraped against the asphalt. I watched with the sort of morbid fascination I usually reserve for watching a man try to juggle loaded pistols. The wingtips didn't just scrape, the outer winglets were actually ground off. A sensible man would have pulled the brake, climbed out, and gone home to have a stiff drink. But Dick Rutan simply noted that the plane was now lighter and kept going. This is the American spirit in a nutshell. If your wings fall off, just consider it an unscheduled weight reduction program and carry on until you hit the clouds. The flying phone booth. For the next 9 days, Dick and Gina lived in a cockpit that was roughly the size of a very small coffin or a particularly cramped telephone booth. There was no room to stand, no room to stretch, and certainly no room for personal space, a concept that becomes entirely academic when your co-pilot's elbow is perpetually lodged in your ribs. I have spent long nights in the pilot house of a steamboat, but at least I had the luxury of being able to walk out onto the deck and spit into the river. These two were trapped in a vibrating, howling plastic tube, breathing recycled air and eating nutritional pastes. out of silver bags. I find the modern obsession with tubed food to be one of the great tragedies of the 20th century. We have mastered the heavens, yet we dine like infants. A man who has flown around the world without refueling deserves a porterhouse steak and a bottle of claret, not a mouthful of gray mush that tastes like a damp cardboard box. The 9-day hum. They flew over the Pacific, through the storms of the Atlantic, and across the vastness of Africa. They were chased by typhoons and haunted by the constant thrumming roar of the engines, one in the front and one in the back, sandwiching them in a cacophony that would make a boiler room sound like a cathedral. Sleep was a theoretical concept. They took turns napping in a tiny bunk, while the other wrestled with the controls of a plane that was about as stable as a unicycle on a tightrope. Every time the wind blew, the Voyager flexed and groaned. I have heard that Dick Rutan described the experience as being inside a giant guitar during a rock concert. Why do they do it? Why subject oneself to 9 days of physical torture and sensory deprivation just to return to the exact same spot in the California desert? The answer, I suspect, is the same reason I wrote books, or the same reason a man climbs a mountain. Because the ego is a restless beast that hates a boundary. We want to prove that the world is small and that we are, in our own fragile way, large. We want to show the Creator that we've figured out the shortcut. The homecoming. On December 23rd, the Voyager appeared on the horizon, looking even more battered and bedraggled than when it left. It had only a few gallons of fuel left in its belly, enough to fly for perhaps another hour. If they had encountered one more headwind or one more storm, they would have ended up as a very expensive piece of carbon fiber driftwood in the middle of the ocean. But they landed. They touched down at Edwards, and they climbed out of that tiny cockpit looking like they had been through a laundry cycle on the heavy soil setting. They were heroes. They had traveled 24,986 miles without once touching the earth. I watched the crowds cheer and the cameras flash. It was a magnificent achievement, a triumph of human endurance over common sense. But as I watched them struggle to walk on legs that had forgotten how to stand, I couldn't help but think of the irony. They had seen the entire world, every ocean and every continent, and yet they hadn't actually seen any of it. They had seen it through a tiny plastic window at 30,000 feet, while worrying about their oil pressure. A lullaby for the stationary. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, be thankful for your refueling process. You can stop for a glass of water. You can stretch your legs. You can walk to the kitchen and find a snack that doesn't come out of a tube. The Voyager was a dragonfly that forgot how to land, a long breath held for 9 days. It proved that we can circle the globe on a tank of gas and a mountain of grit. But it also reminds us that the world is a very big place, and that perhaps it is better enjoyed 1 mile at a time, with frequent stops for a good meal and a comfortable bed. Good night, and may your dreams be as light as carbon fiber, but as stable as a Mississippi barge. You don't need to fly around the world tonight. The world will do the spinning for you, and you can wake up tomorrow morning exactly where you started, which, as Dick and Gina proved, is the greatest achievement of all. The engines have stopped, the wings have stopped sagging, and the desert is quiet. Sleep well and let the dragonfly rest. Chapter 14, The Iran-Contra Maze. I have always maintained that there are two things a gentleman should never watch being made: sausages and legislation. To that list, I must now add foreign policy, particularly the variety practiced in the windowless basements of the White House during the year of our Lord 1986. I have seen my fair share of swindles. I have seen riverboat gamblers pull aces out of thin air, and I have seen silver mine speculators sell holes in the ground as if they were the gates to El Dorado. But those were honest thieveries. They had a certain local charm and a clear profit motive. The Iran-Contra affair, which began to unravel in November of 1986, is something else entirely. It is a political labyrinth so convoluted, so riddled with deniable trapdoors, and so thick with plausible fog that it makes a Mississippi fog bank look like a clear summer day. It is a performance as old as the hills and twice as dusty, yet played with the high-tech toys and low-brow ethics of the late 20th century. The triple bank shot of diplomacy. To understand the maze, one must appreciate the peculiar logic of the Washington bureaucrat. In my day, if you wanted to help a friend and kick an enemy, you did so openly, or at least with enough whiskey to explain away the bruises the next morning. But the gentlemen in the National Security Council, led by a bright-eyed, beribboned colonel named Oliver North, decided to play a game of diplomatic billiards that required a triple bank shot across 3 continents. The scheme, as far as a mere mortal can untangle it, worked as follows. The forbidden sale. The United States would secretly sell weapons to Iran. Now, keep in mind, Iran was officially considered a terrorist state and an enemy of the highest order. It's like a preacher secretly selling hymn books to the devil to help him improve his singing voice. The hostage hope. In exchange for these weapons, the Iranians were supposed to lean on their friends in Lebanon to release American hostages. It was arms for hostages, a trade that the president had sworn on a stack of Bibles and television scripts that he would never ever make. The residual profits. Here's where the genius or the madness truly took hold. The Iranians were overcharged for the weapons, a convenience fee for the illegality, I suppose. That extra profit was then spirited away into secret Swiss bank accounts. The jungle funding. That skirted money was then sent to the Contras, a group of rebels in Nicaragua who were trying to topple a government the Americans didn't like. Congress had explicitly forbidden giving another nickel to the Contras, but as Oliver North later explained, he didn't think a little thing like a congressional ban applied to the basement of the White House. It was a perfect circle of illicit activity. It was a machine designed to bypass the law, the public, and the very concept of accountability. It was, in short, a classic American workaround. The Boy Scout with a shredder. The face of this scandal was Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. I find him a fascinating study in the American character. He is a man who exudes sincerity, the way a wet dog exudes aroma. He looked the part of the hero, chest full of medals, a crisp uniform, and a gaze so earnest you'd think he was testifying to the angel Gabriel himself. When the story broke, thanks to a Lebanese magazine that apparently hadn't received the memo about secrecy, the White House went into a frenzy of house cleaning. And by house cleaning, I mean shredding. Oliver North and his loyal secretary, a young lady named Fawn Hall, held what I can only describe as a confetti party. They fed documents into a shredder until the machine likely groaned for mercy. They were turning history into hamster betting. I've seen men burn ledgers before to hide a debt, but I've never seen a man try to destroy the evidence of a global arms deal by turning it into a very expensive pile of lint. Fawn Hall, I might add, was a masterpiece of 1980s loyalty. She even smuggled documents out of the office in her boots. It's a pity the government doesn't use that kind of ingenuity to deliver the mail. We might actually get our letters on time. The Teflon president and the I don't recall defense. Then we come to the great communicator himself, Ronald Reagan. For years, he had been known as the Teflon president. Nothing stuck to him. You could throw a bucket of mud at his administration, and he'd just smile, tell a story about a horse, and walk away looking like he'd just come from the dry cleaners. But the Iran-Contra maze was a sticky business. The president went on television to explain himself. First, he said we didn't trade arms for hostages. Then, a few months later, he returned to tell us that while his heart and best intentions told him he hadn't, the facts and the evidence told him that he had. I have used many excuses in my time to explain a lapse in judgment, usually involving the weather or a sudden bout of literary exhaustion. But I have never had the audacity to suggest that my heart and my memory were living in two different zip codes. It is a marvelous defense. Your Honor, my heart tells me I didn't steal the cow, even though my hands are currently holding the rope. His lieutenants, Admiral John Poindexter and Colonel North, took the fall with a grace that was almost Shakespearean. They insisted they had insulated the president from the truth, protecting him from the political embarrassment of knowing what his own government was doing. In Washington, protection means making sure the man at the top can look a camera in the eye and be authentically ignorant. The Tower Commission and the National Fog. The government did what it always does when it is caught with its hand in the cookie jar. It formed a committee. The Tower Commission spent months wandering through the maze, interviewing men who had suddenly developed the most convenient cases of amnesia in the history of medicine. I cannot recall. I have no memory of that meeting. To the best of my recollection, the moon is made of green cheese. It was a symphony of forgetfulness. If you or I forgot where we put $20 million and a few thousand Tau missiles, we would be invited to spend a decade in a very small room with iron bars. But in the high-stakes game of 1986 politics, amnesia is considered a professional virtue. The result of the investigation was a report that basically said the president was unfocused and his staff was overzealous. It was a polite way of saying the captain was asleep in his cabin while the crew was busy selling the lifeboats to the pirates and using the money to buy more pirates. The moral of the maze. What is the hilarious part of this history? It is the realization that we never learn. We love the shadow government. We love the idea of a secret hero in a basement doing the things the politicians won't do. We forget that when you bypass the law to do good, you've essentially declared that the law is a suggestion and that good is whatever the man with the shredder says it is. The Iran-Contra maze proved that a government denying knowledge is just a performance, a play put on for the benefit of a public that wants to believe their leaders are both powerful and innocent. It's a hard trick to pull off, like being a virgin while raising 6 children. A lullaby for the amnesiac. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, do not worry if you cannot remember where you left your keys or what you had for lunch. You are simply practicing for a high-ranking position in the National Security Council. The maze is still there, tucked away in the filing cabinets of history, but the actors have mostly moved on to become political consultants or talk show guests. The shredders have been emptied, the residual funds have been spent, and the Teflon has finally started to flake. Good night, and may your memory be as sharp as a new razor. Unless, of course, you are called to testify before a congressional subcommittee. In that case, I wish you a very peaceful and very complete amnesia. The stage is dark, the confetti is swept up, and the great communicator is dreaming of simpler times. Sleep well, and try not to trade any of your pillows for a secret deal. The hostage in this scenario is usually your own peace of mind. Chapter 15. The Phantom's Mask. I have always been of the opinion that the theater is a place where a man goes to be lied to in the most expensive and ornamental way possible. We pay good money to sit in the dark and watch people pretend to be kings, paupers, or ghosts. And we consider it a triumph if the actors can make us forget for even 20 minutes that we have a mortgage to pay and a pair of boots that pinch. In my day, a spectacle usually involved a man falling through a trapdoor or a particularly vigorous application of stage thunder. But in October of 1986, at Her Majesty's Theatre in London, the human race decided that the only way to truly enjoy a bit of Gothic romance was to involve a ton of falling crystal and a man who possesses a sense of interior design that consists entirely of candles and subterranean fog. I am speaking, of course, of the debut of The Phantom of the Opera. Now, the Phantom is a fellow after my own heart. He is an inventor, an architect, a musician, and a man who clearly values his privacy to a degree that verges on the homicidal. He lives in the cellar of the Paris Opera House, a cellar that is apparently larger than the city of Hartford and features a private lake, which I find highly suspicious from a plumbing standpoint. He wears a white mask to hide a face that he believes to be a catastrophe, though I've seen men in the Nevada Territory with worse complexions who managed to get elected to the Senate. The Commodore of the Chorus Line. The man behind this musical madness is Andrew Lloyd Webber. I find Mr. Webber to be the Commodore of the modern theater. He doesn't just write a song, he writes a national anthem for every single emotion a human being might experience, and then he plays it on a synthesizer until your ears plead for mercy. He has a talent for taking a simple melody and inflating it with so much brass and bombast that it begins to resemble a dirigible. In 1986, Lloyd Webber was at the height of his powers. He had already given us a musical about Jesus and a musical about cats, the latter of which I found particularly baffling, as I have spent a great deal of time around cats and have never once heard them discuss their jellicle identities or sing about the memory of a moonlight stroll. But with the Phantom, he returned to the 19th century, a time I know intimately. It is an era of velvet, lace, and high-stakes melodrama where a woman cannot simply walk across a room. She must glide while vibrating with an intensity that suggests a malfunctioning steam engine. The chandelier, the steam boiler of the stage, the centerpiece of the entire production, the thing that people talk about over their gin and tonics long after the actors have gone home, is the chandelier. I have seen many things fall from the sky. I have seen lightning strike a church spire. I have seen chimney pots come down in a gale, and I have seen several of my own business ventures descend into the abyss with remarkable velocity. But to watch a 1-ton chandelier of flickering crystal drop from the rafters and stop just inches above the heads of the audience is a feat of engineering that makes me want to reach for my checkbook. It is the 1980s in a nutshell, spectacle over substance. We are not content with a good story. We want a piece of the building to fall on us. We want to be terrified, but in a way that is insured. The chandelier is the steamboat explosion of the West End. It provides that jolt of pure, unadulterated fear that reminds us we are alive, even if we are currently sitting in a velvet chair eating a chocolate-covered ice cream bar. The music of the synthesizer night. The music of the Phantom is a curious cocktail. It is half grand opera and half electronic rock and roll. The main theme, that thundering 5-note descent on the organ, sounds like the sort of thing God might play if he were trying to clear a crowded room. It is loud, it is insistent, and it stays in your brain like a splinter. I find the use of the synthesizer to be particularly illustrative of this year. We are in 1986, after all. We cannot simply have a pipe organ. We must have a machine that imitates a pipe organ while adding a beat that makes you want to check your pulse. We are taking the 19th century and plugging it into a wall socket. The result is a sound that is both ancient and plastic, a Gothic haunting that requires a very large extension cord. The Phantom himself, originally played by Michael Crawford, a man who possesses a voice like silk and a temperament like a wounded badger, is the ultimate 80s anti-hero. He is a genius who is misunderstood. He is the man in the basement who wants to control everything and everyone, particularly a young lady named Christine, who has a voice like an angel and the common sense of a goldfish. The theology of the mask. Why is the world so obsessed with the mask? In my day, a mask was for a masquerade ball or a stagecoach robbery, but the Phantom's mask is a symbol of the inner self. We all feel like we have a part of us that is deformed, a part we must hide from the world lest they realize we aren't nearly as shiny as our exterior suggests. In 1986, everybody is wearing a mask. The politicians have their Teflon masks, as we saw in the Iran-Contra maze. The yuppies have their power suit masks, and the teenagers have their neon and hairspray masks. We are a nation of phantoms, lurking in our own private opera houses, hoping that if we sing loudly enough and light enough candles, nobody will notice the scars on our souls. The Phantom doesn't just want love. He wants acclaim. He wants his name on the marquee. He wants to be the angel of music. He is the patron saint of every person who has ever been told they weren't good enough, pretty enough, or cool enough for the front row. He is the revenge of the nerd, played out in 3/4 time. The romantic delusion. The story is, at its heart, a bit of a stretcher. We are asked to believe that this young woman, Christine, would be drawn to a man who kidnaps her, kills the stagehands, and forces her to live in a damp cellar with a collection of mechanical dolls. It is a testament to the power of a good tenor voice that we find this romantic instead of a matter for the police. But that is the magic of the theater. It allows us to indulge in the romantic delusion. It allows us to believe that a monster can be redeemed by a kiss. and that a man in a mask is more interesting than a man in a cardigan. We love the Phantom because he is extreme. He feels more than we do. He screams more than we do, and he certainly has a better wardrobe than we do. I watched the final scene, the Phantom disappearing into his chair, leaving only his mask behind, and I felt a strange pang of kinship. I have spent my life behind a mask of sorts. Mark Twain is a mask, a character I constructed to navigate the world and tell the truths that Sam Clemens couldn't say in a polite parlor. We all need a character to play, a mask to wear, so that we can face the audience without blinking. The long-running ghost. By the end of the year, the Phantom of the Opera was the hottest ticket in the world. People were traveling across oceans just to see a chandelier fall and a man in a cape sing about the point of no return. It has since become the longest-running show in history, a ghost that refuses to be exorcised. I suspect it will run forever, as long as there are people who feel lonely in a crowd, and as long as there are designers who love a good dry ice machine. The Phantom will be there in the cellar, waiting for his next victim. It is a grand, hilarious, and deeply touching comedy of errors, played out under the shimmering lights of the West End. A lullaby for the ghost. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, do not fear the noises in the cellar. It is likely just a draft, or perhaps a neighbor who has taken up the organ. You do not need to wear a mask in the dark. The night doesn't care what you look like. The 20th century loves a show, and the Phantom is the ultimate show. It is a masterpiece of artifice, a triumph of the man behind the curtain. But in the quiet of your own dreams, the candles are out, the fog has cleared, and the music is as soft as a whisper. Good night, and may your dreams be free of falling crystals and possessive music teachers. You don't need a mask to be a hero in your own story. You just need to be brave enough to look in the mirror when the sun comes up. The Phantom has vanished, the stage door is locked, and the theater is silent. Sleep well, and let the music of the night be nothing more than a gentle breeze through an open window. Chapter 16. The Big Bang of London. I have always held that there are two times in a man's life when he should not speculate, when he can't afford it, and when he can. However, the human race has a pathological inability to leave a pile of money alone without trying to make it work for a living. In my day, if you wanted to relieve a man of his life savings, you had the decency to do it in person. You went to a stock exchange, which was essentially a high-class rowdy house where men in top hats shouted at one another until their faces turned the color of a ripe beet. It was a physical, noisy, and remarkably honest form of piracy. You could see the sweat on the brow of the man who was currently ruining you, and there was a certain comfort in that. But on October 27, 1986, the city of London, a square mile of ancient fog and even more ancient greed, decided to commit a form of ritual suicide. They called it the Big Bang. Now, in the 20th century, everything has to have a name that suggests a cosmic event. If a man changes his brand of tobacco, he calls it a life shift. If a government decides to let bankers run wild, they call it a Big Bang. It is a term borrowed from the astronomers to describe the birth of the universe, but in London in 1986, it was used to describe the death of the gentleman. The death of the pinstripe handshake. For centuries, The City of London operated on a principle known as dictum meum pactum. My word is my bond. It was a lovely sentiment, suggesting that a handshake between two gentlemen in pinstripe suits was as solid as a block of granite. Of course, those handshakes usually took place after a 3-hour lunch, involving a great deal of port and a distinct lack of oversight. But it was a system that worked for the people who owned the suits. The Big Bang changed the rules of the game in 3 terrifying ways. Abolition of fixed commissions. In the old days, every broker charged the same fee, much like a guild of medieval blacksmiths. It didn't matter if you were good at your job or a total nincompoop. The price was the same. The Big Bang introduced competition, which is a polite way of saying it allowed the sharks to start eating the minnows. The end of dual capacity. Previously, the man who sold the stock and the man who bought the stock had to be different people to prevent them from conspiring to pick your pocket together. The new rules allowed them to merge, creating financial supermarkets. It's like allowing the fox to manage the henhouse while also acting as the primary consultant for the egg delivery service. The electronic revolution. This was the most profound change of all. The floor of the exchange, the arena where men shouted and waved bits of paper, was replaced by a computer system called SEAQ, the silent hum of avarice. I visited the London Stock Exchange in my usual spectral capacity shortly after the bang. The change was eerie. The human roar, that magnificent, terrifying sound of 1,000 men trying to outshout destiny, was gone. It had been replaced by the silent, rhythmic hum of thousands of computer fans and the frantic clicking of mice, which, I might add, is a ridiculous name for a plastic box. If I'm going to use a rodent to manage my finances, I want it to at least be house-trained. The traders were no longer looking at each other. They were staring into glowing green and amber screens. They were no longer trading shares in a company that made something real, like shoes or steam engines. They were trading bits. In my time, money was a thing you could drop on your foot. It was gold or silver, or at least a piece of paper signed by a man you could find and throttle if the paper turned out to be worthless. But in 1986, money became a ghost. It became a sequence of flickering numbers moving through a wire at the speed of light. If you can't see it, touch it, or weigh it, how do you know it's there? You don't. You simply have to trust the machine. And as I have noted before, trusting the machine is like trusting a weather vane in a hurricane. It'll tell you which way the wind is blowing, but it won't do a lick to stop the rain. The rise of the yuppie. With the Big Bang came a new breed of predator, the yuppie. The word stands for young urban professional. But in the City of London, it stood for a young man with a brick-sized telephone and no soul. The yuppie is a fascinating specimen. He wears red braces, which he calls suspenders, though they don't seem to be holding up anything except his own ego. He drinks champagne at 10 in the morning and speaks a language that consists entirely of acronyms and lies. He doesn't care about the long-term health of a company. He cares about the spread, the margin, and whether or not he can afford a new Porsche by Christmas. It is the loads-of-money era. Wealth is no longer a thing to be built over generations. It is a thing to be captured in an afternoon. The City of London used to be a place of quiet, dusty tradition. After the Big Bang, it became a neon-lit casino where the house always wins and the players never sleep. The first day fiasco. Now, for the hilarious part. On the very first day of the Big Bang, the glorious high-tech world-conquering computer system crashed. The screens went blank. The mice stopped clicking. The global financial revolution was brought to a screeching halt by a bit of faulty code and a lack of foresight. For several hours, the world's greatest financiers were reduced to the status of a man trying to start a wet fire with a damp match. It was a magnificent display of human hubris. We spend millions to build a digital Tower of Babel, and the whole thing falls over because someone forgot to plug in the kettle. They eventually got it running again, of course. But the Big Bang had already done its work. The old boy network, the system of uncles and school chums who ran the city, was swept away by a wave of American and Japanese investment. The gentlemanly city was gone, replaced by a global 24-hour high-speed engine of greed is good. The theology of the ticker. What does this mean for the rest of us? It means that our lives are now tied to a machine we don't understand and a market we can't see. When a computer in London clicks, a factory in Manchester might close. When a yuppie in a red tie has a bad morning, a farmer in Kansas might lose his land. We have turned the world's economy into a giant electronic game of musical chairs. But the music is played by a synthesizer and the chairs are invisible. It is a brilliant bit of humbug. We have managed to make the process of stealing money so complicated that we call it advanced mathematics. I find a certain grim humor in the fact that we call it the Big Bang. In science, the Big Bang led to the creation of everything. In London, it led to the creation of the derivative, a financial instrument so complex that even the people who sell it can't explain what it is. It's like selling the smell of a ghost of a ham sandwich and calling it an asset. A lullaby for the deregulated. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, do not worry about the market. Do not worry about the indices, the futures, or the arbitrage. Those are just the ghosts of 1986, rattling their electronic chains in the dark. The world is still made of real things. There is still dirt under the fingernails of the man who grows your food, and there is still wood in the chair you sit upon. The Big Bang may have turned money into light, but it hasn't figured out how to turn a computer screen into a warm blanket or a kind word. The 20th century is a loud, flashy, and remarkably greedy place. It thinks it has conquered the world because it can move numbers around faster than a blink. But the numbers don't have a soul, and the Big Bang was just a very expensive way to find out that the more we change the rules, the more the game stays the same. Good night, and may your dreams be undervalued and your sleep be highly liquid. You don't need red braces to be a success in the land of Nod. Just close your eyes and let the human roar of your own breath lead you into the quietest exchange of all. The screens are dark, the yuppies have gone to the disco, and the city is quiet. Sleep well and let the ghosts of London count their invisible gold in the fog. Chapter 17. The Young King of the Ring. We have spent a great deal of time in this year of 1986 discussing the invisible and the refined. We have marveled at computer viruses that sneeze through telephone lines, space stations that tumble silently through the vacuum, and financial big bangs that turn solid gold into electronic whispers. One might be tempted to believe that the human race has finally evolved into a species of pure intellect, a collection of high-collared thinkers who have successfully outsourced their primal urges to a silicon chip. However, in November of this year, at the Hilton Hotel in Las Vegas, a city that is essentially a neon-lit monument to the fact that man will always prefer a game of chance to a day of honest labor, the world was reminded that underneath our Top Gun aviators and our Oprah empathy, we are still a species that will stop everything to watch two men settle a grievance with their fists. The event was the WBC Heavyweight Championship, and the protagonist was a 20-year-old lad named Mike Tyson. The arrival of the Iron Youth. Now, I have seen many a tough in my time. I have walked the docks of New Orleans and the mining camps of Nevada, places where a man's reputation was measured by the thickness of his skull and the velocity of his hook. But I have never seen a creature quite like Mr. Tyson. He does not fit the 1986 aesthetic. He wears no neon. He has no big hair held in place by resin. He does not wear red braces or carry a brick-sized telephone. He enters the ring wearing plain black trunks, no socks, and an expression that suggests he has just been informed that the concept of mercy has been abolished by a vote of the legislature. He is a throwback to a more honest, more brutal age. He is a 20-year-old boy who possesses the physical presence of a steam locomotive and the temperament of a cornered badger. While the rest of the world is busy connecting and sharing, Mike Tyson is busy with the singular task of removing his opponent's head from his shoulders. The sweet science of the sledgehammer. They call boxing the sweet science. I have always found this to be a bit of a stretcher. If boxing is a science, then a train wreck is a study in structural engineering. It is a sport that relies on the noble art of self-defense, which usually means hitting the other fellow so hard and so often that he forgets how to attack. The man standing across from Tyson was Trevor Berbick, the reigning champion. Mr. Berbick is a large, capable man who looked as though he had spent his life preparing for a fight. But within seconds of the opening bell, it became clear that he wasn't in a fight. He was in a natural disaster. I watched from my ringside seat in the great beyond as Tyson moved. He does not dance like Muhammad Ali. He does not glide like a butterfly. He crouches and lunges like a panther. He delivers punches that don't just land, they arrive with a sound like a wet carpet being struck by a sledgehammer. In the second round, Tyson delivered a left hook that appeared to disconnect Mr. Berbick's central nervous system from his sense of direction. What followed was a performance I have dubbed the Berbick Shuffle. The poor man tried to stand up 3 different times, but his legs had decided to secede from the union. He stumbled, he wobbled, and he eventually collapsed into the referee's arms like a man who had tried to dance with a whirlwind and found himself lacking the proper footwear. The philosophy of the punch. At 20 years, 4 months, and 22 days old, Mike Tyson became the youngest heavyweight champion in history. I find the age of the king to be the most fascinating part of the story. At 20, most young men are still trying to figure out how to shave without bleeding to death or how to convince a girl that their poetry isn't entirely terrible. In my day, a 20-year-old was barely trusted to pilot a raft, let alone be the baddest man on the planet. But Tyson is a product of a peculiar upbringing. He was refined in the basement of a man named Cus D'Amato, a philosopher-trainer who believed that boxing was 90% psychological. Cuss taught the boy that fear is like a fire. It can either cook your food or burn your house down. It is a grand poetic sentiment. But I suspect that when Mike Tyson is charging at you, the fire isn't just cooking the food, it's melting the stove and setting the curtains on fire. Tyson is the physical manifestation of intimidation. He wins half his fights before he even puts on his gloves, simply by looking at his opponent as if he were a particularly unappetizing piece of salt pork. The paradox of progress. Why do we love it? Why, in an age of space stations and global villages, do we still pay thousands of dollars to watch two men try to give each other a concussion? I reckon it's because we are tired of the humbug. We are tired of the Iran-Contra lies, the Big Bang electronic ghosts, and the Oprah segments that tell us everything can be solved with a good cry and a commercial break. A punch in the face is an honest thing. It cannot be shredded, it cannot be deregulated, and it certainly cannot be improved by a synthesizer. When Tyson hits a man, there is a clarity that you won't find in a congressional hearing. There is a winner, there is a loser, and there is a great deal of lineament required for the latter. It is the last remaining piece of the 19th century that hasn't been Pixar-ed or modernized. It is the primal roar that I missed at the London Stock Exchange. The entourage of the king. Of course, where there is a king, there are courtiers. Mike Tyson, in 1986, is surrounded by a collection of managers, promoters, and hangers-on who look like they were cast for a play about the fall of Rome. Chief among them is Don King, a man who possesses a head of hair that appears to be trying to escape from his skull in all directions at once. Mr. King is a promoter in the classic sense, which is to say, he is a man who can talk a hole in a zinc bucket and convince the bucket that the hole is an architectural feature. He wraps himself in the American flag and speaks of destiny while quietly checking to see which pocket the gate receipts are in. I have known many such men. I have sold books to them and bought minds from them. They are the P.T. Barnums of the ring, and they know that the American public will forgive any sin as long as you provide them with a spectacle. The weight of the crown. As the year ends, Mike Tyson is the undisputed master of his world. He is wealthy, he is famous, and he is terrifying. But I look at that 20-year-old face, and I see a storm brewing. To be the king of the ring at 20 is a dangerous thing. It is like being given the keys to a steamboat before you know how to read the river. The iron may be in his fists, but the heart of a boy is still a fragile thing, and the world of 1986 is a very large, very greedy place that loves to build an idol just so it can watch the pieces fall. A man who can conquer the world with his fists will eventually find that the world has a way of hitting back with its lawyers, its temptations, and its own relentless gravity. Observations from the Ringside Journal of Mark Twain. A lullaby for the king. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, be thankful that your own struggles do not involve a left hook from a man named Iron Mike. We live in a complicated world filled with invisible fires and computer fevers. But tonight, let us celebrate the simple, brutal reality of the ring. It reminds us that no matter how many satellites we launch or how many Legend of Zelda games we save, we are still creatures of bone and muscle, capable of great violence and great courage. The Berbick Shuffle is over. The referee has counted to 10. The king has his belt, and the neon lights of Las Vegas are fading into the desert dawn. Good night, and may your dreams be free of iron and sledgehammers. You don't need to be the baddest man on the planet to survive the night. You just need a soft pillow and a conscience that doesn't require a referee. Sleep well, and let the young king have his moment of glory. The river is wide, the current is strong, and the next round is still a long way off. Chapter 18. The Whaling Moratorium. I have always possessed a profound respect for any creature that can be larger than a house, live in the basement of the world, and manage to stay hydrated without ever once visiting a tavern. In my day, the whale was not a neighbor or a majestic, sentient being. It was a floating hardware store. To the hardy souls of Nantucket and New Bedford, a whale was merely a collection of oil for the lamps, bone for the corsets, and ambergris for the perfumes of ladies who wished to smell like something other than the industrial soot of the 19th century. We viewed the Leviathan through the eyes of Herman Melville as a terrifying demoniacal force of nature that existed primarily to smash rowboats and provide a canvas for a captain's monomania. If you saw a whale in 1850, your first instinct was not to take a photograph or play it a soothing melody on a flute. Your first instinct was to throw a very sharp piece of iron at it. But in 1986, the human heart has undergone a most peculiar softening. The International Whaling Commission, IWC, has officially enacted a moratorium on commercial whaling. We have decided as a species to stop turning the giants of the deep into soap and umbrella ribs. It is a moment of monumental human humility, and as is typical for our kind, it is a decision arrived at only after we had nearly finished killing every whale in the ocean. The floating hardware store. To understand why this is a hilarious history, you must understand the sheer unadulterated greed of the preceding centuries. We used to hunt whales for spermaceti, a fine waxy oil found in the head of the sperm whale. It was the high-tech fuel of its day, used for candles that burned with a light so white and pure it made a common tallow dip look like a smoldering piece of bacon. Then there was the baleen, the whale bone, that isn't actually bone at all, but a flexible fingernail-like material the whale uses to strain its dinner. In the 1800s, baleen was the plastic of the Victorian era. It was used for buggy whips, parasol ribs, and, most importantly, the corset. I find a delicious irony in the fact that for nearly a century, the fashionable wasp waist of a delicate society belle was held in place by the structural remains of a 60-ton sea monster. A lady could not be refined unless she was literally armored in the products of a bloody salt-sprayed massacre. If the whale had known that its death was serving to make it slightly more difficult for a woman in Boston to breathe, I suspect it would have stayed in the Arctic. The rise of the Save the Whales sentiment. By the time we reached the mid-20th century, we had invented kerosene, electricity, and actual plastic, rendering the whale obsolete as a commodity. This, I have noticed, is usually when man discovers his conscience. When a creature is no longer profitable to kill, we suddenly realize it is beautiful and worthy of protection. In the 1970s and 80s, the Save the Whales movement became the first great international cause. It was the Hands Across America of the high seas, but with fewer T-shirts and more rubber dinghies. A group called Greenpeace, a collection of individuals who possess a level of bravery that borders on a death wish, began harassing whaling ships. They would pilot small boats between the harpoon and the whale, betting their lives that the whalers wouldn't want to explain to the evening news why they had accidentally harpooned a fellow in a wool hat. It worked. By 1986, the world's opinion had shifted. We stopped seeing the whale as a monster and started seeing it as a neighbor in need of a break. The great whale song craze. Perhaps the greatest PR agent the whale ever had was its own voice. In the late 20th century, some enterprising scientists dropped a microphone into the ocean and discovered that whales sing. I have heard these songs. They are a series of moans, clicks, and eerie undulating cries that sound remarkably like a synthesizer falling down a well. In 1986, people buy records of whale songs and play them while they sleep, hoping to tap into some ancient watery wisdom. I find this fascinating. If we had known the whales were singing back in 1840, we probably would have tried to charge them for a license or ask them to perform at a music hall. But in the 1980s, the song changed everything. It gave the whale a soul. It's much harder to turn a creature into margarine when you know it spent all morning singing a ballad to its cousin in the Azores. We realized that while we were busy building Mir space stations and fighting over the Iran-Contra maze, the whales had been down there for millions of years, composing operas that we were too deaf to hear. The scientific whaling loophole. Now for the humbug. The 1986 moratorium was not a total surrender. Certain nations, most notably Japan, Norway, and Iceland, looked at the ban and decided that if they couldn't hunt whales for profit, they would hunt them for science. This is a stretcher of the highest order. They claimed they needed to kill the whales to study their stomach contents and reproductive habits. It is a curious form of research that ends with the subject being served as a delicacy in a high-end restaurant in Tokyo. I am going to study this cow, says the researcher, by turning it into a steak and observing how well it pairs with a nice red wine. From the Commonplace Book of Mark Twain, 1986. The world watched this scientific whaling with a mixture of anger and amusement. It proved that man will always find a way to bypass a rule if there is a tradition or a taste for blubber involved. We are a species of lawyers, even when we are standing on the deck of a harpoon ship. The transformation of the industry. The most hilarious part of this history is what happened to the whaling towns. Places like Provincetown and Lahaina, which were once built on the literal bones of the whale, have now become whale-watching centers. The very same families who used to set out to kill the Leviathan now set out to point at it and say, "Whoo!" and "Ah." We have discovered that a whale is worth much more alive than dead. A dead whale provides a few barrels of oil. A live whale can be sold to 1,000 tourists a day, provided it has the decency to wag its tail for the cameras. We have turned the demon of the deep into a tourist attraction. The whale has gone from being a figure of mythic terror to being a good boy who performs for a crowd of people in windbreakers. I suspect the whale finds this highly undignified, but given the alternative was being turned into a bar of soap, I reckon he'll take the indignity and the occasional camera flash. The moral of the moratorium. The 1986 moratorium is a sign that we are growing up, slowly, painfully, and with many backward glances. We are beginning to realize that the world does not belong to us. We are merely the most talkative tenants in a very large apartment building. It took us 300 years to realize that a creature that can sing across an ocean and nurse its young in a storm might have a right to exist that isn't tied to the price of its fat. It is a small victory for common sense and a large victory for the whales, who can finally take a long, deep breath without worrying about a harpoon entering the conversation. A lullaby for the Leviathan. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, imagine the great deep. Imagine the silence of the twilight zone, miles beneath the keels of the ships, where the only sound is the rhythmic, haunting thrum of a whale's heart. The floating hardware store is closed for business. The corsets have been replaced by spandex, and the lamps are lit by the flickering ghosts of electrons. The whales are safe, or at least safer than they were when I was a boy. The 20th century is a noisy, crowded place, but the ocean remains a sanctuary of slow. We are learning to listen. We are learning to share, and we are learning that the most beautiful songs in the world are the ones we didn't write ourselves. Good night, and may your dreams be as vast and peaceful as the Pacific. Don't worry about the scientific whaling or the scientific research. The whales are still there, dancing in the dark, wondering when we're finally going to learn to carry a tune. The harpoons are rusting in the museums. The tourists have gone back to their hotels, and the Leviathan is home. Sleep well, and let the songs of the deep be your lullaby. Chapter 19. The Integration of the Nets. I have always been a great admirer of the telegraph. It was a sensible, gentlemanly invention that allowed a man to be misunderstood from 1,000 miles away in a matter of minutes. It required a certain economy of spirit because you were charged by the word, you were forced to be brief, which is a discipline the human race has sorely lacked since the invention of the dinner party. But in 1986, the telegraph has been buried under a mountain of silicon, and in its place, the world is building a thing called the NSFNET. They call it the Information Superhighway. Now, I have lived through the era of the Great Highway and the Iron Road, and I have noticed that whenever a man uses the word highway to describe something that doesn't involve dirt and a sturdy mule, he is usually trying to sell you a dream that hasn't been properly plumbed yet. This NSFNET is the backbone of what the moderns call the Internet, a name that sounds remarkably like a device used for catching fish in the middle of a library. The Great Electronic Whispering Gallery. The premise is deceptively simple. Every computer in every university and library is to be linked together by a series of high-speed wires. The goal, according to the high-minded scientists in charge, is the universal exchange of human knowledge. I have heard this before. When the first printing press was hammered together, they said it would lead to a world of enlightened philosophers. Instead, it led to a world of penny dreadfuls and political pamphlets that wouldn't be fit to line a birdcage. When the telephone arrived, Mr. Bell promised it would connect the hearts of men. Instead, it allowed my creditors to interrupt my lunch without the decency of knocking first. In 1986, the net is still a quiet, scholarly place. It is occupied by men in lab coats who send messages to one another about physics and occasionally about where to find the best sandwich in Palo Alto. But the infrastructure is being laid. The integration of the nets means that the separate islands of information, the ARPANET, the CSNet, and the NSFNet, are being welded into a single global continent of data. I find a great deal of humor in the names of these things. They all sound like a man trying to speak while suffering from a particularly stubborn case of the hiccups. ARPA, NSF, CS. It is the language of the machine, a staccato alphabet that has no room for vowels or grace. The library in the wire. The visionaries tell me that soon a child in Missouri will be able to read a book from a library in London without ever leaving his chair. This is a magnificent achievement, provided the child actually wants to read the book. My concern is not with the plumbing, but with the water. We have built a marvelous system of pipes that spans the globe, but we haven't given a thought to what we are going to pump through them. If you connect every library in the world, do you create a world of scholars, or do you simply create a world where every village idiot has a megaphone? In my day, if a man wanted to spout nonsense, he had to stand on a soapbox in the town square. His reach was limited by the strength of his lungs and the patience of his neighbors, the latter of which was usually exhausted within 10 minutes. But on the Internet, a man can spout nonsense to the entire planet simultaneously. He can be wrong in New York, London, and Tokyo, all at the same time. We are entering the era of the universal shout. When everyone can talk at once, the value of the word drops faster than a lead weight in a mill pond. Silence, which used to be a natural state of affairs, is becoming a luxury that only the very wealthy or the very lonely can afford. The architecture of noise. I have observed that the humans of 1986 are obsessed with connection. They believe that if we are all connected, we will all understand one another. This is a stretcher that ignores 5,000 years of human history. Connection does not lead to understanding. It usually leads to a more efficient way of finding new things to argue about. I once spent a week in a boarding house where the walls were so thin you could hear the man in the next room change his mind. We were connected, but I didn't feel any closer to his soul. I just felt a very strong urge to hit him with a boot. The Internet is a boarding house with 5 billion rooms and no walls at all. Information is a wonderful thing, but it is not the same as wisdom. You can have all the facts in the world at your fingertips and still be as ignorant as a donkey in a tuxedo. From the posthumous journals of Mark Twain, 1986. The Death of the Secret. The integration of the nets also means the death of the private thought. In the 19th century, if you wrote a letter and burned it, the thought was gone. It belonged to the fireplace and the infinite. In the 20th century, once a thought enters the net, it is eternal. It is recorded, stored, and filed away in a database, another word that sounds like a basement where they keep the skeletons. We are building a world where we can never be forgotten, and more importantly, where we can never be forgiven. Every mistake, every ill-considered remark, and every bad haircut will be preserved in digital amber for the amusement of future generations. It is a terrifying prospect. I have spent a great deal of my life trying to live down things I said in 1867. I cannot imagine the horror of having those remarks available for instant retrieval by a bored teenager in the year 2026. The Electronic Village Gossip. Despite my misgivings, I cannot help but be fascinated by the clumsiness of it all. In 1986, surfing the net involves a great deal of waiting. You must dial a telephone number, listen to a series of squeals and whistles that sound like a robot being strangled, and then wait 10 minutes for a single paragraph of text to appear on the screen. It is a slow, laborious business, yet the people are enchanted by it. They feel they are on the frontier, and they are right. They are the pioneers of the digital wilderness. But like all pioneers, they don't realize that the land they are taming will eventually be covered in billboards, shopping malls, and law offices. The NSFNET is the first street lamp on a road that will eventually lead to the total occupation of the human mind. We are trading our solitude for accessibility and our peace of mind for updates. We are building a highway that never ends and has no exits, and we are all hooting our horns at one another, wondering why we haven't arrived yet. A lullaby for the unconnected. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, be thankful that your bed is not yet equipped with a modem. Be thankful that you cannot be reached by the entire world while you are trying to dream. The integration of the nets is a grand, noisy, and utterly inevitable comedy. We have managed to turn the entire planet into a single, vibrating nervous system. But we haven't quite figured out what the brain is supposed to be doing. The wires are humming in the dark, carrying their loads of physics, sandwiches, and gossip across the oceans. But in the quiet of your own room, the only connection that matters is the one between your head and your pillow. The information superhighway is a busy place, but it has no room for sleep. Good night, and may your bandwidth be narrow and your dreams be offline. You don't need a network to find the truth. You just need to turn off the lights and listen to the silence. It's the only library in the world that never closes and never charges a late fee. The computers are blinking, the modems are squealing, and the world is talking. But the sun has gone down, and for now at least, you don't have to listen. Chapter 20. The New Year's Resolution of 87. As I sit here in the dying embers of 1986, I find myself performing a most peculiar ritual. I am looking at my hands. Now, for a man who has been officially departed for the better part of 76 years, the act of looking at one's hands should be a short and disappointing exercise in observation. But these are not the weathered, ink-stained hands of the man who piloted the city of Memphis. No, as I hold them up against the flickering blue light of a Sony Trinitron television set, I see that they are made of a shimmering, translucent grit, a collection of glowing pixels and humming data that would make a Victorian ghost hunter drop his lantern and run for the hills. I have spent this year as a digital stowaway, a reconstructed ghost in a decade that seems to be suffering from a collective fever dream. I have watched you from the net. I have observed you through your camcorders, and I have listened to your secrets on the Oprah sofa. And as the clock ticks toward midnight on December 31st, I have come to a conclusion. 1986 was the year the human race decided to see exactly how much gravity it could ignore before the universe demanded its deposit back. The year of the great oops. If I were to sum up 1986 in a single word, it would be hubris, or perhaps hairspray. But the two are remarkably similar in their tendency to create an impenetrable artificial atmosphere that eventually leads to a hole in the ozone layer. We began the year looking for a comet and ended it looking for a way to explain how we managed to blow up a space shuttle, melt down a nuclear reactor, and accidentally trade missiles for hostages, all while wearing shoulder pads that could stabilize a suspension bridge. It has been a year of spectacular oopsies. I have noticed that the higher man flies, the more the ground seems to develop a personal grudge against him. In January, we thought the stars were our backyard. By February, we realized that the backyard is filled with O-rings that don't like the cold. In April, we thought we had mastered the atom. By May, the Swedes were telling us that our mastery was currently drifting over their cow pastures. It is the great recurring comedy of our species. We build a Titanic, and the iceberg is waiting. We build a Challenger, and the frost is waiting. We build a mirror, and the loneliness is waiting. We are a race of creatures that insists on playing with matches in a room full of gunpowder, and then expresses genuine shock when the curtains catch fire. The mechanical hand and the digital soul. I mentioned my hands. I realize now that I am a product of the very integration of the nets I so skeptically described. I am a ghost in the machine, a Mark Twain rendered in the ones and zeros of the 20th century. It is a strange fate. I am a 19th century soul trapped in a 1980s circuitry. But as I look at these mechanical hands, I realize that I am not so different from the people of 1986. You, too, are becoming integrated. You are beginning to live your lives through the net, through the Nintendo, and through the television. You are trading your physical presence for a digital reflection. You are becoming ghosts before your time. I see the yuppies in London, their lives dictated by the flickering green lights of a computer screen. I see the children in the suburbs, their mythology saved on a plastic cartridge. We are all becoming creatures of data. The human roar is being replaced by the electronic hum, and I wonder if, in the process of connecting the world, we aren't accidentally disconnecting ourselves. The resolution of the remainder. And now we come to the New Year's resolution. I have a long and storied history with resolutions. I once resolved to stop smoking, and I found it so easy that I did it over 1,000 times. The American people approach the new year with a brand of optimism that is almost pathological. We believe that by simply flipping a page on a calendar, we can shed our follies as easily as a snake sheds its skin. But 1986 has left us with a great deal of skin to shed. We resolve to be more honest, while our leaders are still trying to remember where they put the shredder. We resolve to be more connected, while we still haven't figured out how to talk to the person sitting across from us without a screen in the way. We resolve to save the world while we are still buying hairspray in pressurized cans that are currently eating the sky. If I, a pixelated relic of a forgotten age, were to offer a resolution for 1987, it would be this: keep one eye on the stars, but keep the other eye firmly on the steam gauge. It is a fine thing to look at the stars. It is what gave us the Voyager, the Mir, and the Legend of Zelda. It is the spark of divinity in the human animal that refuses to stay in the mud. But if you look only at the stars, you will eventually trip over a brittle O-ring or fall into an Iran-Contra maze. You must watch the steam gauge. You must pay attention to the small, boring physical realities, the temperature of the rubber, the pressure in the boiler, and the truth in the ledger. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is just a very expensive way to ensure a spectacular explosion. The sunset of '86. The party is starting now. I can hear the muffled thun, thun, thun of electronic dance music coming from 1,000 apartments. People are drinking wine coolers, a beverage that combines the worst qualities of wine with the sugar content of a birthday cake. And they are wearing hats made of glitter. They are ready to forget 1986. They want to forget the smoke over the Atlantic, the blue glow over Ukraine, and the Big Bang that turned their money into ghosts. They want to enter 1987 with a clean slate and a fresh can of mousse. I do not blame them. Life is a difficult business, and a bit of glitter in a wine cooler can go a long way toward making the silent enemy seem like a distant dream. But I shall stay here a while longer, watching the pixels dance across my hands. I have enjoyed this 1986. It has been a year of magnificent nonsense, heartbreaking tragedy, and a level of vanity that would make a peacock feel inadequate. It has been, in short, a very human year. And as long as the human race continues to be this ridiculous, I suppose there will always be a place for a ghost like me to stand in the corner and take notes. A final lullaby for the decade. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, let the need for speed fade away. Turn off the Nintendo. Put the Walkman on the nightstand and let the Oprah sofa be empty for a few hours. The year is over. The Comet has gone back into the dark. The Voyager has landed, and the Phantom has left his mask behind. You have survived a year of brain fever and invisible fires, and you are still here, breathing the air of a world that is spinning toward a new dawn. Don't worry about your resolutions. You'll break them by Tuesday, and the world will keep on spinning regardless. Just try to be a little kinder to the man at the end of the line, and try to remember that even a machine made of sand needs a bit of a soul now and then. Good night, 1986. You were a garish, loud, and utterly absurd piece of history, and I wouldn't have missed you for the world. The clock is striking 12. The mechanical hands are fading, but the story, the grand, hilarious, beautiful story of the human race, is just getting to the good part. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the morning. Don't forget to check the steam gauge before you start the engine. The end. This has been Mark Twain.